Chapter 1056. Li Qitian's good mood lasted for the whole day. When they set up camp at night, he was in a good mood and ate 4 pieces of meat. He also talked to Xiong Jinshui about the days when he led the troops to war and didn't even have a sip of hot water to drink. Xiong Jinshui was moved and sighed repeatedly about how difficult it was for Your Majesty to establish the country. However, when he was woken up by a burst of heat in the middle of the night, his good mood was gone. Outside the tent, an orange flame had already lit up a corner of the snow-white tent. The air was filled with the smell of burning. Li Qitian rolled over and sat up. He grabbed the horsewhip and sword and rushed out of the tent. "There's a fire. Save His Majesty." In front of the tent, Xiong Jinshui didn't notice that Your Majesty had already gotten up. He was still screaming for help. His voice was so sharp that it was hoarse. Li Qitian kicked Xiong Jinshui's butt. "Stop screaming. Come out with Zhen." Then he grabbed Xiong Jinshui's collar and directly took him out. In the end, he was the founding emperor who was about to establish the country. He was naturally different from those weak emperors who had sat steadily for many years. A small fire couldn't startle him at all. The air outside the tent wasn't much fresher. Even the tents were burning. The fire startled the war horses. The horses were all tied up and couldn't escape. Each and every one of them was neighing wildly. Some of the soldiers were anxious to save their horses. Some of them panicked and went to get water to put out the fire. In front of Li Qitian's tent, Pang Xiao was limping and leading people to put out the fire. He had his back to Li Qitian, so he naturally didn't see that someone had already rushed out. Ma Cheng took a copper basin of cold water and poured it over his head. He turned around and wanted to rush into the tent. In the end, he bumped into Li Qitian face to face and almost knocked him into the tent. Li Qitian was knocked in the chest by Pang Xiao. For a moment, he couldn't breathe and his vision turned black. If Xiong Jinshui didn't push him in the back, he would have fallen down. Pang Xiao raised his head. His wet hair was still dripping. When he saw that Li Qitian was fine, he immediately shouted happily, "Big brother, are you all right?" In a moment of desperation, he didn't even know how to address him as Your Majesty and directly addressed him as Big Brother. Pang Xiao was still wearing his white pajamas. His entire body was drenched and he was in such a sorry state. However, Pang Xiao had rushed in to save him. He was confused. Was he overthinking? Did Pang Xiao not have any intention of rebelling at all? Especially when he called him Big Brother, it brought back many memories of the past. The two of them had supported each other and protected each other's lives. That was how they had achieved their current glory and wealth. They had survived so many difficulties, so why couldn't they enjoy wealth and wealth together now? Li Qitian sighed and stood up with the help of Xiong Jinshui and Pang Xiao. "We are fine." "Great." Ma Cheng cheered and immediately said, "Just now, the fire suddenly flared up. Wang Yi's tent was burned down and he immediately rushed out to rescue Your Majesty. Fortunately, Your Majesty is blessed by the heavens and has the protection of the heavens. It's just that the fire's origin is really strange." The camp was in chaos. The soldiers were in a hurry to save the horses, and some went to the stream to get water to put out the fire. Some even took off their outer robes and carried water to put out the fire. They didn't have enough things to do, so they could only make do like this. Li Qitian held the sword and the horsewhip. With people protecting him on both sides, he felt much more at ease. Thinking of Jingang's words about the fire dragon and seeing the large camp now shrouded in a sea of fire and thick smoke, he felt a wave of disgust in his heart. He was the son of heaven and had the protection of the heavens. This fire naturally didn't start because of him. What warning from the heavens? It was simply nonsense. Someone must have set the fire. Li Qitian said gloomily. "Go." "Yes." Ma Cheng cupped his fists and answered. Tang Xiu took a robe and put it on Pang Xiao. "Wang Yi, your injuries haven't healed yet. You still have a fever on the way. You have to take care of yourself." Pang Xiao's entire body was soaked. He was shivering from the cold, but he insisted on keeping up appearances. "I'm fine." Li Qitian thought of their friendship in the past, and his heart softened. "Jishi, go change your clothes first." "Your Majesty, this subject is fine." This subject is strong and healthy. My body is fine. Li Chitian frowned. If you fall ill, who will protect you? You won't even listen to my decree? Pang Xiao stiffened his neck and wanted to argue, but in the end, he shut his mouth unwillingly and turned to follow Tang Xiu to find clothes to change into. Li Chitian couldn't help but think of the day when Pang Xiao jumped high in front of him and argued with him. At that time, he was also so disrespectful and looked so repulsive. Today, he was still suspected of disobeying the decree, but he couldn't get angry. Perhaps he was really overthinking it. Thinking about it carefully, it was all because of that so-called Tian Jiz's comment that he had a grudge and gradually alienated Pang Xiao. However, thinking of the people's evaluation of Pang Xiao, thinking of the love and respect of the people for Pang Xiao, and most importantly, thinking of the admiration of many men in the imperial army for Pang Xiao, Li Chitian felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. If Pang Xiao had the intention to rebel, he didn't need the tiger tally to dispatch troops and horses at all. He just needed to stand in front of the camp and shout, and hundreds would respond to his call. In the past, only the Tiger Army was like this. Now, the southern Pingnan army was also subdued by him. Such a powerful and popular person like him had even more support than himself. No matter whether he had the intention to rebel or not, as long as this person existed, he would always be a threat to his throne. Thinking of this, Li Chitian's heart, which had just been moved after being rescued, hardened again. Every man for himself, and the heavens take the hindmost. He was just trying to protect the throne and was afraid of his sworn brothers. He wasn't like the brothers of the previous dynasty who killed each other. What wrong did he do? While he was thinking, Li Chitian had been escorted to a spacious and quiet place by the stream. Pang Xiao had also changed into a new set of clothes. However, because the fire was too intense, the luggage he had brought with him had been burned to ashes. At this moment, he was wearing a coarse short jacket that he had casually borrowed from a soldier. Pang Xiao's attendants and bodyguards were standing in the distance with their horses. The frightened horses were still faintly manic. Li Chitian looked at Pang Xiao's appearance, then turned to look around for Lu Heng's figure. "Where's Zhong Yibor?" Pang Xiao was stunned by the question. "Your Majesty, this subject didn't see Zhong Yibor." Replying to Your Majesty, this servant also didn't see Zhong Yibor. Xiong Jinshui and Pang Xiao said in unison. Li Chitian frowned. Ma Cheng immediately said, "Could it be that Zhong Yibor and Madam didn't escape?" This time, Ma Cheng panicked. He immediately rushed to Lu Heng's tent with his men. However, the tent was burned to ashes at this time, but there was no corpse inside. Zhong Yibor and his family were also not in the crowd. Ma Cheng's face immediately darkened. He reported this matter to Li Chitian. Li Chitian's heart burned with anger. He said in a low voice, "Go see if Zhong Yibor's carriage is still there." Ma Cheng obeyed and immediately found that Zhong Yibor's carriage was still there, but the horse pulling the carriage was no longer there. Moreover, Zhong Yibor's attendants and family were no longer here. Chapter 1057. Pang Xiao frowned. He stood in place and didn't say anything. However, Li Chitian was already fuming with anger. He waved the horsewhip in his hand angrily, whipping a dead tree on the side of the road until its bark flew everywhere. "Lu Heng, you bastard. He deceived me so badly. First, he hid the treasure, then he deceived me. Now, in order to escape, he wants to assassinate me. How dare he?" Li Chitian roared angrily. He was so angry that he was about to go crazy. "Your Majesty, please calm down." Pang Xiao, Xiong Jinshui, and the others all knelt down. However, Li Chitian's anger didn't dissipate. Li Chitian looked at the chaotic camp in front of him, listened to the cries of the people who were putting out the fire, and then looked at the sorry state of everyone in front of him. He lowered his head to look at the sleeping clothes he was wearing. He simply couldn't suppress his anger. Lu Heng, that bastard, was simply toying with him like he was a child. He must have hidden the treasure long ago and deliberately used Pang Xiao to distract him. He had used his family background as a threat, and he had also used his fear of Pang Xiao, which he had never tried to hide. He was opportunistic. What was laughable was that he actually believed his words and gave him the opportunity to escape. Li Chitian even had a premonition that he might not be able to find the treasure in the remaining 5 paths. Because Lu Heng had already hidden the treasure. Ah! Li Chitian roared angrily. Everyone once again lowered their heads in silence. They didn't dare to react at all. When the fire was finally put out, the sky was already brightening. Ma Cheng's face was covered in dust as he replied, "Your Majesty, the fire has been put out." Fortunately, no one was injured. A few war horses were burned, and some escaped because they weren't securely tied. Fortunately, the wind was weak yesterday, so the fire didn't spread to the nearby forest. Li Chitian snorted coldly with a sullen face. Ma Cheng immediately lowered his head and didn't say anything. How could there be so many lucky ones? Li Chitian, as the emperor, had left the capital for the sake of the treasure, which had already been criticized by the people. Now, not only did he fail to obtain the treasure, he even caused a so-called natural disaster warning among the people. Before the rumor had died down, he encountered a fire on his way back to the capital and almost lost his life. In this situation, Li Chitian found it hard to dispel the gloominess in his heart. He simply couldn't think of any fortunate, because he simply didn't care how many casualties there were, whether the war horses were burned to death, or whether the forest was set ablaze. Right now, he was only thinking about how he had lost face this time. It was simply too humiliating. Pang Xiao knew Li Chitian's thoughts the best. Seeing that Ma Cheng still wanted to say more, he quickly gave him a wink. Ma Cheng was stunned for a moment and then understood. He blinked at Pang Xiao gratefully and lowered his head, not daring to speak anymore. However, Xiong Jinshui was having a hard time at this moment. Wang Yi and the general didn't speak, so he could only brace himself and ask, "Your Majesty, did you send a letter back to the capital and send someone else to pick you up? Not to mention other things, Your Majesty's belongings were all burned away, including the dragon robe and ceremonial guard. Do you want Your Majesty to quietly return to the capital in commoner's clothes with a dirty face? When the civil and military officials know that Your Majesty has left the capital, they will definitely come to pick you up." Xiong Jinshui couldn't imagine how the rumors would spread when the civil and military officials saw Your Majesty in a sorry state at the gate of the capital. How angry would Your Majesty be? Li Chitian obviously also thought of this. He looked conflicted and didn't know what to do for a moment. In addition, it was fine to send someone to pick you up or go back quietly. With so many people here, the situation here couldn't be hidden. If he tried to hide it, people might laugh at him for having a guilty conscience. But if he didn't hide it, people would say that it was a warning from the heavens. No matter what he did, it would be difficult. Seeing Li Chitian in such a difficult situation, Pang Xiao hesitated and said, "Your Majesty, why don't we continue our journey first? When we arrive outside the capital, order someone to quietly enter the city to prepare the items for Your Majesty's ceremonial guard. This time, you led the troops to suppress the bandits, which is equivalent to reenacting the battle formation of the past. In the past, when the troops returned to the capital, there was no reason for them to immediately enter the city. They had to wait outside the city for a day before entering the city. When the time comes, they will be stationed outside the city to give the civil and military officials enough time to prepare to welcome Your Majesty. As for encountering bandits on the road, Your Majesty will send people to eliminate them. When the fighting is intense, the bandits will be forced to commit murder and arson. I don't think anyone will have any other ideas about this matter." Pang Xiao's proposal made Li Chitian's eyes light up and his mood suddenly brighten. "You are still young and quick-witted." Li Chitian sighed. Pang Xiao scratched his head and said with a smile, "Your Majesty is in the prime of his life." It's not that he didn't think of it, he was just angry for a moment. Why was he angry? Of course it was because of Lu Heng's deception and assassination. When Li Chitian thought of Lu Heng, he gnashed his teeth and instructed Xiong Jinshui in a low voice, "Then do as Wang Yi says." Xiong Jinshui immediately complied. His admiration for Pang Xiao was as high as a mountain. In an instant, he was able to think of a way to solve the problem and appease Your Majesty. He was also able to slander Zhong Yibor at the same time. It was no wonder that such a person could become the only imperial prince of this dynasty with a different surname. Everyone set off again. Without the ceremonial carriages, horses, and carriages, they naturally traveled faster. When they arrived at the city gates, they set up camp and secretly ordered people to fetch the ceremonial robes. At this point, Pang Xiao's suspicions regarding the treasure were completely cleared. As for Li Qitian's anger towards Lu Heng, it was no surprise that it implicated the Lu clan and those related to the Lu clan. The imperial court was about to welcome a baptism. At this time, Qin Yining was standing on a warship. He used a monocular to look at the land in the distance. "That's the Wo Nation?" Liao Zhibing nodded. "Yes, that's one of the Wo Nation's harbors. Our people disembarked from here last time. Near the harbors is Sichuan Isheng's famous water swamp nation. However, you also know that their nation is like a relatively large village in our world." Qin Yining nodded. "Even so, they are the local tyrants. We can't underestimate them." Qin Yining turned around to look at the warship behind him. He thought for a moment and said, "Is the harbor there very large? Is it as large as Golden Harbor?" Gao Delai smiled honestly. "Alliance head, the harbor there isn't as large as Golden Harbor. It can't accommodate so many warships. At most, it can accommodate 2 warships at a time." Xie Yu and Xu Weiji understood what Qin Yining meant. They smiled and asked, "Princess, what are your plans?" Qin Yining smiled and said, "The 2 largest warships carrying the cargo naturally can't dock. We'll leave some reliable people to guard them. The rest of the warships should prepare to disembark. I'll take one of the warships with me and scout them out." "Princess, are you planning to personally disembark and meet Sichuan Isheng?" Xie Yu disagreed. "Princess, you have a high status. There's no need for you to personally make this trip. Why don't this old man go and meet him?" "That's right. This old man is willing to travel with Brother Xie. We're unfamiliar with this place, so it's best if Princess doesn't show up." Chapter 1058. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji still wanted to persuade her, but Qin Yining's attitude was resolute. They also knew that the youth named Sakurai had died in order to save Qin Yining. Moreover, he had died at the hands of his own people. That kind of injustice and that kind of tragic death had become a thorn in Qin Yining's heart. With Qin Yining's personality, if she couldn't resolve this matter, she would never be at ease for the rest of her life. Therefore, the 2 of them didn't continue to persuade her. They only said, "Since Wang Fei has made up her mind, it's better to bring enough people ashore." "That's natural." Qin Yining turned around and smiled. "The 2 of you are very resourceful and good at judging the situation. You can stay on the ship to provide support. I will transfer to a smaller turreted ship later and bring enough guards. Sir, take the other warships further away and don't come close. Turn around and wait for my signal." Qin Yining took out a signal firework specially used by the Qingtian Alliance. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji immediately understood Qin Yining's meaning. They nodded and said, "Wang Fei, don't worry." Qin Yining nodded. She immediately ordered people to make preparations. She returned to the cabin and was helped by Ji Yun to change into a luxurious honey-colored brocade robe. She put on a Yang Fei-colored cloak with large sleeves. Her long hair was tied up in a flying immortal bun. She wore a set of gemstone head ornaments. Even the jade on her collar and skirt were of excellent quality. Qin Yining rarely dressed up in such a splendid manner. Naturally, she shone brightly. Ji Yun also changed into a bright maidservant's outfit. She supported Qin Yining and said, "Wang Fei, when we get ashore later, please don't leave this servant's side." Qin Yining smiled and nodded in agreement. She turned to instruct Liao Zhibing, Jing Zhe, and the other people accompanying her. "Later, we will call ourselves merchants from southern Yang. You are all my associates, so don't make a mistake in your address. Since there are people among us who can speak Japanese, there's no guarantee that there aren't people in Japanese who are proficient in Daju's language. Don't give yourself away." "Yes." Everyone agreed without any hesitation. Seeing that Qin Yining had arranged everything so well that he had even changed his origin so as not to expose his identity, Xie Yu and Xu Weiji were very relieved. They stayed on the boat and waited for the signal. Chin Yining boarded the smallest ship in the group and slowly approached the port of the Waterpool Nation. On the shore of the harbor, there were many people drinking wine and barbecuing meat around a bonfire. Perhaps it was because it was rare to see such a magnificent ship approaching, but when they saw Chin Yining's ship, they were very alarmed. From the deck, Chin Yining could hear the Japanese people shouting and yelling. They were wearing sleeveless gowns and holding spears, aiming at the ship. Some of them were even wearing straw sandals, running back to report the situation. Chin Yining asked Gao Delai, "What did they say?" Gao Delai said, "They asked who we were and didn't allow us to approach the port. Otherwise, they would kill us without mercy." Chin Yining said with a laugh, "Tell them that we are merchants from the southern Yang Kingdom. We don't have any bad intentions." Gao Delai nodded and stood on the deck and said these words loudly in the Japanese language. When the other party heard this, they didn't lower their guard. They all pointed their spears at the ship, as if they were facing a great enemy. "Madam, are we still going to dock?" Jingzhe asked. "Dock? Don't worry about them. Let's dock and get off the ship. Let's wait for their manager to come. I think someone has already gone to report the situation." The ship lowered its sails and slowly sailed into the harbor. The Japanese people couldn't help but retreat in panic, and their shouts became even more intense. After the ship lowered its plank, Chin Yining and Ji Yun got off the ship under everyone's protection. The Japanese people's shouts suddenly became softer. Chin Yining took a few deep breaths and said with a smile, "After so many days, we finally have our feet on the ground." Ji Yun also smiled. "To tell you the truth, this servant's seasickness has been forcibly cured after coming out with Madam these past few days." Liao Zhibing, Jingzhe, Ji Dashun, and the others all laughed. They saw the group of people standing on the dock, chatting and laughing. They didn't carry any weapons, and they didn't seem to have any intention of approaching. Moreover, the leader of the group was a beautiful woman who was dressed the most luxuriously, so the Japanese soldiers were a bit wary. Merchants. They didn't look like merchants, but more like nobles. After waiting for a while, Chin Yining saw a group of people escorting a man in a long robe over. This man was different from the other men who wore straw sandals. His robe had wide sleeves, and he wore wooden clogs. He looked to be in his 40s, and he had a calm demeanor. Every step he took was steady and steady. It seemed that he was a calm and resourceful person. When he arrived, he stopped 10 steps away from Chin Yining. He looked at Chin Yining from head to toe, and his eyes couldn't hide the astonishment in them. He spoke in the language of the southern Yang Kingdom. "Miss, this is water swamp country. May I ask where you are from? What business do you have with our water swamp country?" Daeju and Dayan languages were similar, but the accent of the south was naturally different from the north. This Japanese man spoke in the dialect of the southern Yang Kingdom. Although his pronunciation wasn't accurate, it was clear that this person had personally visited the Yang dynasty. When northerners listened to the Dayan language, they had to put in a bit of effort to understand it. Moreover, this Japanese man's pronunciation was a bit awkward. For a while, people from Daeju, like Ji Dashun, didn't know what was going on and were on guard. Fortunately, Chin Yining was a native of the south. Liao Zhibing, Jingzhe, and the others were born in the Yang dynasty, so they were very familiar with the language of the Yang dynasty. Chin Yining smiled brightly and stepped forward to return the greeting. She spoke in the dialect of the southern Yang Kingdom. "Greetings to this sir. This young girl is a merchant. I have come out to see this time to travel and do some business. I heard that water swamp country is the most prosperous place in your country. Moreover, the great name is very hospitable and the people are kind and wealthy. Thus, I have specially come to disturb you. I hope that this sir will be able to accommodate me." Chin Yining's voice was already very gentle, and she spoke in the dialect of the south. In addition to her beautiful appearance and beautiful smile, to a man, her beauty was comparable to a sword. And it just so happened that the man who had come to receive her was someone who was very fond of beautiful women. He couldn't hide the shock in his eyes, and his voice became much gentler. "This one is Adochi Tadachi, and I am the #1 warrior under the great name. May I ask how I should address you?" This young girl's surname is Sun, and my husband's surname is Yao." She immediately reported her and Pang Xiao's surnames. "So Miss Sun is already married. Then I should address you as Madam Yao." Adachi Tadachi's tone was naturally to show off his understanding of the southern Yang kingdom. Qin Yining followed his advice and chatted with him. "So Sir Adachi has been to the southern Yang kingdom before? I went a few years ago and lived in the country of Yang for 2 years. Later on, there were always wars over there, so this one returned to the country." "So it was like that." Qin Yining nodded, but he silently cursed in his heart. "Compared to your country where wars happen every 3 to 5 days, our country is already peaceful and prosperous." Chapter 1059. Adachi Manha's eyesight was top-notch, and even though he was 10 steps away from Qin Yining, he could still clearly see the pleading look in her eyes. If it was just a delicate and beautiful woman, he naturally wouldn't make things difficult for her. But this woman had so many attendants with her, and they were all southern Yang people. Many of them went to the southern Yang to make a living, not just in water swamp country, but in the surrounding countries as well. Some of them would make a living in the southern Yang, but others would do things like bandits, leaving a bad impression on the southern Yang people. He didn't know if these southern Yang people would treat them as bandits and come to their country with other intentions. Adachi Manha narrowed his eyes, and his hand involuntarily went to the hilt of the sword at his waist. Ji Yun, who was next to Qin Yining, suddenly tightened her grip on her arm. Qin Yining's other hand, which was hidden in her robe, lightly pinched her thigh before she stopped. Qin Yining's other hand, which was hidden behind her back, waved at the people behind her. Jing Zhe, Liao Zhibing, Gao Dalai, Ji Dashun, and the others were very nervous when they saw the Japanese man holding the sword. Their muscles were tense, and they were already thinking of rushing forward to protect the princess if they failed. But after receiving Qin Yining's signal, they suppressed those thoughts and tried their best to relax their bodies, even squeezing out relaxed smiles on their faces. Qin Yining's entire body was relaxed. Without a trace of vigilance, she didn't know any martial arts, so naturally she was relaxed. After a short test, Adachi Manha discovered that the beautiful woman didn't know any martial arts, and the people behind her looked like ordinary workers. Perhaps they knew some martial arts, but overall, their chances of winning against the 200 or so water swamp country soldiers weren't high. Thinking of this, Adachi Manha calmed himself down. He wanted to make a good impression in front of the beautiful woman, and perhaps even get a chance to get intimate with her. He put a smile back on his face and nodded, saying, "All right, Lady Yao, you and your subordinates can come to do business, but where are the goods you brought? I need to check to see if there is anything harmful to our water swamp country. If there is no problem with the goods, you can come and do business." Madoha Adachi said as he looked at the ship docked at the harbor. That ship was still half new, and it looked extremely imposing. To be able to own such a ship and wear such luxurious attire, a merchant must be a very wealthy person in the southern Yang kingdom. Adachi Totsuya had personally been to the southern Yang and had seen the prosperity of the big cities there. He had also seen how the wealthy merchants lived there. That was a life that was even more luxurious than their reputations. Not to mention that the water swamp country had more than 200 soldiers. There were more than 100 maids and servants in the rich merchant families there. Perhaps this Madame Yarrow came from such a wealthy merchant family. Such friends were worth making. This would bring him more benefits than just a chance to get intimate with her. Qin Yining's face was full of smiles, and her bright eyes reflected the sunlight from the seaside. Her jewelry and luxurious clothes made her look even more beautiful. Her eyes seemed to contain stars as she looked at Adachi Totsuya with a smile. While he was in a daze, she had already seen the struggle in Adachi Totsuya's expression, the change in his expression, the calculation in his eyes, and the wild ambition in his eyes. Qin Yining was angry for a moment. But in addition to her anger, she was also glad that she had met such a person today. When a person had something to ask for, they would also have a weakness, which she could use to her advantage. Otherwise, it would be much more difficult to get things done. She would not forget why she had crossed the ocean to come here. She wanted to achieve her goal, not to be treated with courtesy by a stranger. Qin Yining thought of this and nodded with a smile. "Of course I can inspect it, but it's just some of the daily necessities of the southern Yang kingdom. There are women's rouge and face powder, cloth, wine, bacon, and other things. Qin Yining smiled and gestured for Adachi to board the ship. She was obviously inviting him to board the ship for inspection. Adachi Totsuya's expression did not change, but his heart was palpitating. He stepped closer to Qin Yining and took in her beauty. Qin Yining led him to the boat and signaled for Liao Zhibing and the others to stay where they were and wait. She only brought Ji Yun and Jing Zhe with her. Liao Zhibing, Ji Dashun, and the others' hearts were in their mouths. They secretly estimated whether or not Ji Yun and Jing Zhe could handle Adachi Totsuya. Adachi Totsuya saw that Qin Yining only had 2 attendants, 1 male and 1 female, and followed her to the boat. Looking at her graceful back as she boarded the boat, his heart became more and more excited. When the wooden boat stepped on the wooden planks, Adachi Totsuya's broken southern Yang language came from behind. "Lady Yao, how could your husband bear to let such a beautiful woman like you go out to do business?" Qin Yining's footsteps did not change, but his face was filled with anger. For a man to say such words to an unfamiliar woman, it was clear that he wanted to take liberties with her. Even Ji Yun and Jing Zhe almost turned around to take this person down and apologize to the princess. Qin Yining turned around first and said with a smile, "A merchant's family does not have as many rules as those wealthy families. My husband and I went out at the same time. He went to the north, so I came here. So that's how it is." Adachi Totsuya smiled and said, "It seems that your family is not so strict with women. When I was in southern Yang, there were very few opportunities to see wealthy women like you. They did not go out, only commoner women went out." Qin Yining smiled and said, "I am a commoner woman." Up close, this woman's appearance was even more captivating. Adachi Totsuya's heart was beating like a drum. He was even more nervous than when he was competing in martial arts. He really wanted to leave a good impression in front of this woman. Seeing that she was so easygoing and talkative, it was clear that she did not hate him. Qin Yining led Adachi Totsuya to a cabin that had been prepared in advance. Inside were the goods that they had brought out to sea. Just as she said, there were some ordinary items from southern Yang. As for the weapons and other items, they were on the other 29 warships, which were still far away from here. Adachi Totsuka wanted to leave a good impression on Qin Yining so that they could have a good relationship in the future. Therefore, with Qin Yining by his side, he only briefly checked the goods in the box and did not go to the other cabins. Moreover, his burning gaze always fell on Qin Yining as they walked. Ji Yun and Jing Zhe were angered by Adachi Totsuya's rudeness. However, they had important things to do and could not move, so they could only follow orders. Liao Zhibing and the others stood at the dock and looked at the ship anxiously. When Qin Yining and the others came out safely, they could finally relax. When they came back to the dock, Qin Yining smiled and said, "Mr. Adachi, you have checked. Can you allow us to do business here?" Chapter 1060. Qin Yining's watery eyes flashed and she smiled. "In that case, I would like to thank Mr. Adachi. I would like to ask Mr. Adachi to do me the honor and allow this little girl to treat you to a meal." Adachi Totsuya was overjoyed and nodded repeatedly. "Mrs. Yarrow came from afar, I should be the one treating you. You can leave your men here to move the goods. You can come with me for a stroll." In a moment of desperation, Adachi Totsuya's tone became tough and domineering, even saying such a request like stroll. If it wasn't for the urgent matter and Qin Yining's clear priorities, she would have ignored Adachi Totsuya, who was both overbearing and inexplicably confident. However, coming to a foreign land and being able to meet a person with a weakness, wasn't this also a kind of luck? Qin Yining smiled faintly. "Since Mr. Adachi invited me, I also want to go to your country for a stroll." Adachi Totsuya was full of joy and thought to himself, "Could it be that this beauty is also interested in me? Is she interested in my tall and mighty figure?" His back became even straighter. Qin Yining turned around and ordered Liao Zhibing, "Shopkeeper Liao, bring some men here to move the goods." She pointed to Jiao Delai, Jing Zhe, Ji Dashun, and Ji Yun. "You all come with me." If it wasn't for the presence of outsiders, Liao Zhibing would definitely stop Qin Yining and wouldn't feel at ease letting her walk around the city. However, at this time, Qin Yining had already made a decision and he didn't want to be wishy-washy to avoid arousing Adachi Totsuya's suspicion. Shopkeeper Liao nodded with a simple and honest smile. "Don't worry, boss." He then turned around and ordered Qin Yining, Jinghu Wei, and the other silver mask spies, "Men, boss has ordered us to unload the goods, everyone get busy." Everyone could only comply and move the goods. Adachi Totsuya didn't forget to carefully observe while admiring the beauty. Seeing everyone busy in full swing, his suspicions about the people in front of him decreased a lot. Qin Yining, accompanied by Ji Yun and Gao Delai, left the pier with Adachi Manba. At Adachi's command, the water swamp country soldiers returned to the bonfire and continued to drink and barbecue. However, the topic of conversation changed to the young woman who left with Lord Adachi, as well as the goods on the dock. Away from the seaside, after walking through a winding mountain road, they saw a large field and a neat village. At the end of the village, a slightly imposing building could be vaguely seen on a hill. There were soldiers guarding the hill. "This is water swamp country," Adachi Totsuya said proudly. "This large piece of land is ours." He pointed at the cluster of houses. "That's the market." Qin Yining was amazed, but he was cursing in his heart. "This place is even smaller than Huichuan County, but it can be called a country." It seemed that what Mr. Liao said last time was not an exaggeration. Adachi Totsuya led Qin Yining in front, followed by Ji Yun and the others. Behind them was Adachi Totsuya's entourage. The group of people wearing luxurious clothes slowly walked down the slope and along the path to the market, attracting the attention of many people working in the fields. Qin Yining noticed that most of the people working in the fields were women wearing cross-collar robes. Their hair was tied up with cloth towels, and long strips of cloth tied their wide sleeves and clothes, revealing their strong arms and calves. They were barefoot and bent over in the fields. Most of the children didn't have any clothes to wear, only a few had a vest. They were all naked and tanned, helping their families do what they could. The air was filled with the fragrance of grass, and she could vaguely hear people talking in a language she didn't understand. From the looks of it, this place was quiet and beautiful. This was Sakurai's hometown. Sure enough, whether it was in Daeju or here, without looking at the ambitious people in power, the simple people were lovely. Qin Yining smiled and looked at the peaceful scene around him. Adachi Totsuya became bolder and bolder and directly looked at Qin Yining's appearance. Seeing her peaceful smile, he couldn't help but ask, "Does Mrs. Yarrow like it here?" Qin Yining smiled and said, "Your country is very good." Adachi Totsuya laughed happily, "This is just the countryside. You will see better things when we go to the market later." Qin Yining just smiled and nodded. Someone heard Adachi Totsuya's laughter, and the nearby people bowed to salute. When they saw the strange woman dressed strangely and luxuriously beside Adachi Totsuya, they thought that she might be a famous guest, and all of them bowed their heads deeply. Even though Qin Yining was a princess, he was not used to receiving such a big salute from an elder, so he was not used to it. This made Adachi Totsuya even more certain that the woman in front of him was indeed a wealthy merchant, and not a noble of Southern Yang. If she wasn't a noble, she wouldn't have anything to do with Southern Yang, and they could accept their people doing business in water swamp country. The market was indeed more lively. The architectural style here was different from Daeju's, and most of the doors here were horizontal sliding doors. But other than the different languages, Qin Yining didn't think there was much difference. Adachi Totsuya led Qin Yining to the largest tavern. He first lifted the dark blue curtain, then turned to Qin Yining and said with a smile, "Mrs. Yarrow, please come in." Qin Yining smiled and nodded, then followed him in. Adachi Totsuya took off his clogs and stepped on the wooden floor, then walked inside to wait for Qin Yining. Qin Yining thought for a moment, then explained with a smile, "Mr. Adachi, please forgive me. Our Southern Yang's custom is that women cannot casually take off their embroidered shoes outside." Adachi Totsuya naturally knew this custom. Although he was a little disappointed, he waved his hand and said, "Mrs. Yarrow is a guest, please do as you please." Qin Yining smiled and nodded, then led Ji Yun and the others into the tavern. Gao Delai, Jing Zhe, and the others stood on one side of the hall with Adachi Totsuya's entourage, while Ji-yoon followed closely behind Chin-ening. When the tavern owner saw that it was Adachi Totsuya, he immediately came forward to greet him with a very humble attitude. Adachi Totsuya exchanged a few words with him, and the rest of the customers in the tavern were all asked to leave without any complaints. Soon, the hall quieted down. Chin-ening came to a table in front of the window and knelt down. Adachi Totsuya said a few more words to the tavern owner, and the owner responded one by one, then quickly retreated after bowing. Adachi Totsuya sat cross-legged opposite Chin-ening and said with a smile, "I just ordered a few dishes. You don't mind that I made the decision for Mrs. Yarrow, right? You already made a decision, and now you're asking?" Chin-ening smiled and said, "It's okay, I've just eaten, and I just want to follow Mr. Adachi here to take a look." Seeing that Adachi Totsuya's eyes lit up, Chin-ening sneered in his heart. He put on the face of a businessman and said, "I wonder where in the market can I buy cloth, tea leaves, and rouge, face powder, and other businesses." Adachi Totsuya was a little disappointed. It turned out that she was here for business, not to walk around with him. Chapter 1061. Adachi Totsuya smiled and said, "That's easy. I'm the most trusted samurai by the daimyo's side. As you can see, everyone here knows me. If I can help you say a few words, it won't be a problem for you to do business." Chin-ening smiled and nodded, but didn't answer immediately. Seeing the strong desire and calculation in his eyes, Chin-ening lowered his eyes and thought quickly, then replied ambiguously, "Mr. Adachi is really a warm and hospitable person." Adachi Totsuya was a little disappointed that the other party didn't flatter him. But on second thought, if this woman was really someone who could be obtained so easily, she wouldn't be so precious. At this time, Chin-ening smiled and said, "This is my first time in your country, so I don't know much about the local customs here. I'd like to hear about the strange things here. I wonder if Mr. Adachi is willing to explain to this little girl." In order to show that he was knowledgeable, Adachi Totsuya immediately started talking to Chin-ening. At this time, the tavern owner came with his daughter holding a tray. The dishes, wine, tableware, and other things were placed properly one by one. Ji-yoon knelt behind Chin-ening worried that the food was poisonous. Especially when she saw Chin-ening generously raise the clay cup and take a sip of the food in the cup, she was so scared that her whole body tensed up. When Adachi Totsuya saw that Chin-ening was very confident in his food, he was even more sure that the other party was just an ordinary businessman. Moreover, the topic of their conversation revolved around business, so he completely believed in Chin-ening's identity. Adachi Totsuya talked a lot about the local customs and drank a lot of wine. After a while, he talked about the heroic deeds of the daimyo and how he looked down on the countries. At the same time, he took the opportunity to brag about his position as the #1 samurai by the daimyo's side and how brave he was. He felt that this Madame Yarrow's husband might be a typical thin and weak man in the southern Yang. How could such a man satisfy such a beautiful woman? She should like a strong man like him. Therefore, Adachi Totsuka boasted about the battles he had participated in the past. Finally, he said, "The former #1 ninja by Ishikawa daimyo's side was defeated by me in just 3 moves." Hearing this, Chin-ening's heart skipped a beat. He asked calmly, if that's the case, then the #1 ninja is just an ordinary person. How can he be worthy of staying by the daimyo's side? That's right. Therefore, Sakurai was later exiled by the daimyo. Haha. Adachi Mitsuya laughed proudly. It was indeed Sakurai. Chin-ening blinked curiously. Banished? That's right. At that time, Adachi Totsuya paused for a moment before returning to his normal state. Sakurai ignored the daimyo's orders and secretly tried to assassinate the daimyo, which almost caused a war between the two countries. Ishikawa daimyo was so angry that he tied Sakurai to a wooden board and banished her to the sea. After so many years, I'm afraid he's already been fed to the fish, ha ha ha. Adachi Totsuya drank the wine, and his voice became louder and louder. His laughter passed through the wooden wall and into the street. Chin-ening lowered his eyes to hide his thoughts. Just as he was about to open his mouth to compliment Adachi Totsuya, hoping that this person would reveal more, he heard a sneer coming from outside the door. Then he saw a tall and thin young man wearing a half-open grey-blue robe and wooden clogs slowly walking in. When the young man walked, he revealed his sturdy and thin calves under his long robe. His feet were clamped with wooden clogs, and every step he took was light and graceful. The long hair tied behind his head swayed gently as he walked. There were 2 slender swords, one long and one short, at his waist, but they were firmly held by his arms when he crossed them. As soon as Chin Yining saw this young man, he couldn't help but think of Sakurai. Perhaps many years ago, when Sakurai was still highly valued by Ishikawa Yasusei and was still very healthy, she was thin but full of vigor and vitality. Naturally, there was a kind of arrogance and aloofness about her, handsome and cold. The young man looked at Adachi Totsuya and said a long series of words in a mocking tone that Chin Yining couldn't understand. Gao Delai, who was behind Chin Yining, pursed his lips anxiously, as if he wanted to get closer to Chin Yining but didn't dare to do so immediately. Adachi Totsuya was still proud, but when he heard the young man's words, he immediately became angry. He stood up and said a few words to the young man in Nihon. The young man's tone was still mocking, but Adachi Totsuya was getting more and more irritable. Chin Yining couldn't understand what they were arguing about and couldn't help but be a little impatient. Suddenly, he heard a familiar sound from the young man's mouth. Silly Cry was Sakurai's name. Even if he could remember everything wrong, he couldn't remember the pronunciation and writing of Sakurai's name wrong. This person knew Sakurai? Chin Yining looked back at Gao Delai behind him and asked with a questioning look. The two didn't communicate, but Gao Delai immediately understood Chin Yining's meaning and nodded without a trace. Chin Yining immediately understood. The one who was arguing with Adachi Totsuya should be Sakurai's friend, Hiragana. She was also a ninja around Ishikawa Daimyo and was very famous here. Chin Yining lowered his eyes and suppressed the thoughts in his heart. Adachi Totsuya and Hiragana had developed to the point of almost drawing their swords. The tavern owner and the owner's daughter were scared and hid in the corner, looking like they wanted to persuade but didn't dare. Chin Yining's mind turned quickly and suddenly laughed. Mr. Adachi, please don't be angry, don't ruin today's mood because of an ignorant person. She suddenly spoke, breaking the tense atmosphere between the two of them. Both Adachi Totsuya and Hiragana looked at Chin Yining. At this time, Hiragana also saw Gao Delai behind Chin Yining, and his face changed. He was about to speak, but he immediately reacted, tightly pursed his lips, and then looked at Chin Yining who was dressed up. Chin Yining looked at Adachi Totsuya and said with a smile, "Don't you want to drink with this little girl?" Adachi Totsuya gritted his teeth. He still had feelings for the beauty, and he really didn't want to lose face in front of others. He couldn't beat Hiragana, and if he really lost face, how could he regain his dignity in the future? Thinking of this, Adachi Totsuya sat down, waved his hand, and said something to Hiragana. Originally, he thought that Hiragana wouldn't give up. Every time they met, Hiragana was like a mad dog, insisting on a duel. If he didn't accept, Hiragana wouldn't give up. But today, when he said this, Hiragana just snorted coldly and turned away. Adachi Totsuya was very surprised, but he also secretly rejoiced. Chin Yining held his sleeve with one hand and held the pot with the other, and poured a glass of wine for Adachi Totsuya. "Mr. Adachi, who was that rude person just now? Why did he come to trouble you for no reason?" Adachi Totsuya held the wine poured by the beauty, and for a moment, he drank it all in one gulp, only to taste the fragrance in his mouth. Chapter 1062. So that's how it is. Chin Yining smiled. Since Mr. Adachi is the #1 samurai by the daimyo's side, why would you be afraid of such a small character? He just had to teach him a good lesson, so that he won't bother you in the future. Adachi laughed. You don't know, but I'm much older than him. Besides, I'm the #1 samurai. If I agreed to compete with him, wouldn't I be bullying the weak? I don't want to lower myself to his level. In the words of the Southern Yang country, I'm being magnanimous. Chin Yining couldn't help but admire him. Mr. Adachi is indeed knowledgeable and magnanimous. This little girl admires you. Haha. You're too kind. Adochi became more and more excited after being praised by the beauty. During this meal, Qin Yining didn't eat much and didn't say much. However, Adochi kept talking in order to please the beauty, telling her a lot of truths and lies about the big and small matters of the water swamp country. After the meal, Adochi brought Qin Yining to do business personally and successfully helped Qin Yining close several big and small business deals. Of course, even if they didn't speak the same language, Qin Yining could see that Adochi was using his power to pressure people. Small businessmen generally didn't dare to say anything. Qin Yining took advantage of Adochi's vanity and praised him at appropriate times. In the end, Qin Yining became impatient with this person, but he had to be patient and get along with him, so he didn't speak much. He only looked at him with admiration at appropriate times. But Adochi Totsuya felt that the two of them had made great progress. Qin Yining's gaze towards him was automatically interpreted by him as affectionate. When night fell, Adochi smiled and asked, "It's already late. Why don't you stay in my house for a while?" When he invited, he looked at Qin Yining with burning eyes full of desire and excitement. The people behind Qin Yining had already seen through Adochi Toma's crooked thoughts. They weren't surprised to hear him say this, but they still felt angry. Ji Yun cursed in her heart. If Wang Yi was here, would he still allow this fellow to continue chattering? I would have twisted his head off and kicked it like a ball. Qin Yining's patience had long since run out. He pretended to be tired and smiled. "Thank you for your kind intentions, Mr. Adochi, but it's really inconvenient to disturb your residence. This little girl plans to return to the ship to rest." As she spoke, her bright eyes blinked. Adochi immediately saw the servants following behind her and felt that he had grasped the crux of the matter. Today was the first day they met, and there were so many people around her, so it was not convenient. Madame Adochi did not continue to pester her. She smiled and said, "Then I'll send Madame back." "Sir, you've had a long day. How can I trouble you again? It's not tiring at all. You're so beautiful. What if you encounter danger while walking at night? It's better to have me by your side." Qin Yining ground her teeth and smiled shyly. "In fact, this little girl doesn't really want to come out in public. It's just that I'm forced to do business. If I can sell my silk as soon as possible, I will be able to travel around here freely." "Silk?" Adochi Toma subconsciously said. Silk was not something that ordinary people could afford. Even the most noble may not be able to afford to wear a few pieces of silk from the Yang dynasty. Qin Yining said with a smile, "That's right. Among the things I brought, silk is the most important one. If I can't sell the silk, I won't be at ease. When I return home, I won't be able to explain to my husband." So this was what she was afraid of. Adochi Totsuya felt that the relationship between them had already advanced by leaps and bounds, and the beauty throwing herself into his arms was just around the corner. Even if it was to fight for more time with her before she returned to China, he should find a way to help her sell the silk. Thinking of this, Adochi Toma said proudly, "It doesn't matter. I'll go see the daimyo tomorrow. The daimyo has many beautiful women around him. There are also many noble women in our water swamp country. I believe they will all like the silk you brought. Of course, the premise is that the price is fair." Qin Yining stopped and looked at Adochi Toma with admiration. "Of course, the price will be fair. Mr. Adochi, thank you very much." "You're welcome." Adochi Toma waved his hand proudly. "I'm the #1 warrior by the daimyo's side. This is just a matter of a few words. You can rest assured." Adochi Toma sent Qin Yining back to the dock. The two reluctantly said their goodbyes, and then Qin Yining returned to the ship. Adochi Toma turned back and said to the guards at the port, "You must not offend Mrs. Yao. You must give her the greatest convenience." Afraid that Qin Yining didn't understand, he turned around and told Qin Yining in the Yang dynasty language that he had arranged everything properly. In return, he received a grateful smile from the beauty. After Adochi Toma left with satisfaction, Qin Yining returned to the cabin with an unchanged expression. As soon as he entered the door, he spat with a gloomy face. "A toad wants to eat swan meat. That's right. That guy's thoughts are written all over his face. He wants to curry favor with the princess. It's simply wishful thinking." Ji Yoon was so angry that he spat several times. Qin Yining said, "But fortunately, it was such a lustful thing that made our matter go so smoothly. If it was someone else, I wouldn't have the opportunity to meet the daimyo so quickly." So the princess said that she wanted to sell the silk in order to make him take the initiative to introduce you to the nobles? Yes. Qin Yining nodded. Ji Dashun scratched his head. But why didn't the princess directly reveal her identity as a noble in southern Yang and ask to meet the daimyo directly? Based on the daimyo's previous actions, he should be a sinister and cunning person. He should have offended a lot of people. If someone from a foreign country asked to meet him, why would he immediately agree? Even if he met him, he would be very cautious. Maybe when I mentioned Sakurai, it would immediately lead to a siege. And I originally wanted to investigate what happened to Sakurai, but now it seems that Mr. Liao's investigation was correct. He didn't wrongly accuse the daimyo of Ishikawa. Also, I think that Hiragana's hatred towards Adachi Toma is due to Adachi Toma's contribution. I want to see the daimyo of Ishikawa with my own eyes and confirm with him what he is thinking now. At least when he's not so cautious, he won't directly attack. Everyone nodded in understanding. Gao Delai said, "That Hiragana already recognized me today. He didn't expose us on the spot. He probably wants to observe us. I think he will find a chance to meet you and ask clearly, 'What does the Alliance Master mean?' Just tell him the truth, except for my identity." Gao Delai immediately nodded and said, "I understand." Qin Yining was tired from the day. After washing up, he went to rest. Chapter 1063. Jingzhe, Xiao Shui, Liao Zhibing, and Gao Delai didn't sleep at all. When night fell, the four of them lit a deathly wind and waited on the deck, either standing or sitting. Jingzhe and Xiao Shui were the most alert. Even though they didn't hear any footsteps, their alertness as spies allowed them to immediately sense that someone was approaching. The two of them quietly walked to the side of the ship. Under the illumination of the light and moonlight, they saw a thin figure dressed in black with a sword in his hand. He was crouching like a black panther on the beach, avoiding the guards who were fast asleep and quickly approaching. Just by looking at his hand, they knew that this person wasn't any weaker than them. The two of them immediately turned around and whispered to Liao Zhibing and Gao Delai, "Someone's coming. Tell them to be on guard." As they spoke, the person was already in front of them. The four of them were on guard. After a soft sound, they saw an iron claw hook onto the bow of the ship. Then, there was a slight rustling sound. In the blink of an eye, the black figure scurried onto the deck. The four of them were immediately on guard, as if they were facing a great enemy. The black figure jumped onto the bow of the ship and immediately saw that the four of them had surrounded him. He was shocked. However, when he saw Gao Delai and Liao Zhibing, he let go of his sword and pulled down the black cloth covering his face. The person who came was Ping He. Gao Delai hurriedly whispered to Jingzhe and Xiao Shui, "Don't do anything. This is Sakurai's friend. Master said that he would come, and he really did come." Jingzhe and Xiao Shui didn't completely let down their guard. Their postures and positions were still very guarded. They could explode and subdue him at any time. Ping He also keenly sensed the hostility between the two of them. She narrowed her eyes and looked over. Gao Delai hurriedly whispered in Japanese, "These two are our master's guards. They're so guarded because they don't recognize you." He turned around and said to Jingzhe and Xiao Shui, "This isn't the place to talk. Let's talk inside." Jingzhe and Xiao Shui hesitated for a moment, but when they remembered Qin Yining's instructions, they had no choice but to step aside. Hiratsuchi followed Gao Delai into the cabin while being surrounded by a few people. The lights in the cabin were bright and the lobby was spacious. At this time, the guards who had received the news had rushed over. However, they did not show themselves immediately. Instead, they stood in the shadows. Liao Zhibing said, "Ask him what he's here for." Gord asked about the Japanese food. Ping He Cai stopped looking around and said with a tense body, "The woman I saw in the tavern today is the new owner of Xiaoming? How could she be on good terms with that shameless Adachi? If it wasn't for Adachi Toshiba's cunning plan, Daimyo wouldn't have betrayed Xiaoming. Gao Delai said, "Our ship had just docked when we met that Adachi Manba. Do you think we want to deal with him? That Adachi Manba's eyeballs are almost hanging on our master's body. Our master came here to bury Sakurai in her hometown. He can't let all his efforts go to waste. He can't even go ashore. That's why he had to pretend to be nice to Adachi Manba." Ping Hei Cai was stunned and said with surprise, "Aren't you a merchant ship? I see that you've been busy doing business. Business is just a cover. If our master didn't want to repay Sakurai for saving his life, why would he abandon his family and travel across the ocean to come here?" Ping Hei Cai heard this and immediately became respectful. She sighed and said, "Xiaoming finally found a master who won't let him down. Your master is worth trusting." She lowered her head deeply. Gord and Ping Hei Cai exchanged these words in Japanese. Therefore, Gord had to explain to Liao Zhibing, Jingzhe, and Xiao Shui. The tense atmosphere between the two sides disappeared. Gord invited Ping Hei Cai to take a seat. However, Ping Hei Cai said, "I want to see your master. Is it convenient?" "You want to see my master?" "Yes." Ping Hei Cai nodded heavily. She then said, "I want to know what happened to Xiaoming." Gord then told Liao Zhibing and Jingzhe. Jingzhe said, "Madam should be willing to see this young man. Madam is a very loyal person. She would definitely be willing to see Sakurai's friend. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come here. But it's already late." Liao Zhibing hesitated. Xiao Shui said, "Madam won't mind." Thinking about how Qin Yining had to deal with Adachi Totsuka for so long in order to successfully land in water swamp country, he knew that she wouldn't mind. Xiao Shui stood up and said, "I'll go ask Madam to come out." Everyone nodded. Gord then asked Ping Hei Cai to take a seat and went to get tea. Ji Yun was resting outside Qin Yining's bedroom. When she heard footsteps approaching, she immediately jumped up and scolded in a low voice, "Who is it?" "It's me." Xiao Shui said, "Ping Hei Cai is here. He wants to see Madam." Qin Yining had already woken up when Ji Yun spoke. Hearing this, he sat up and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Ask him to wait for a moment. I'll be right there." "Yes." Xiao Shui responded and quickly went to the main hall. Ji Yun lit a lamp and helped Qin Yining change his clothes. After a simple tidying up, Qin Yining quickly walked out with the lamp. Just as she reached the main hall, she heard a few people talking with a Japanese person with Gord's help. That person's clear and young voice was very familiar. It was the person she met at the tavern. Xiao Shui at the door noticed Qin Yining and smiled. "Madam is here." Everyone quickly stood up to welcome her. Qin Yining and Ji Yun entered one after the other. Their beautiful eyes landed on Ping Hei Cai and sized him up without hiding anything. Ping Hei Cai saw a beautiful woman in a honey-colored brocade robe walk in. Out of courtesy, he immediately lowered his head and did not look at her face. Qin Yining smiled. "Please sit down." Gord immediately translated this to Ping Hei Cai. Qin Yining sat at the head of the table while the others stood on both sides behind him. Ping Hei Cai sat in his original position. Seeing that everyone was respectful and loyal to Qin Yining, he became more curious about this woman. This woman must be an aristocrat. Ordinary women from merchant families would not have such an imposing manner. "Brother, what brings you here so late at night? Today at the tavern, I saw you sitting with that shameless Adachi Manba. I thought you were his friend. But when I saw Mr. Gord and Mr. Liao standing behind you, I remembered the last time I met them. They brought Hideoki's ashes back to water swamp country, hoping to bury him. However, they did not receive permission from the daimyo and were chased away by the people. At that time, they said that if their master knew about this, he would be very angry. So at that time, I guessed that you might be Hideoki's master." Hearing Gord translate Ping Hei Cai's words to her, Qin Yining couldn't help but say, "So his name is Sakurai Hideoki." With a sigh, Qin Yining slowed down and let Gord translate her words to Ping Hei Cai. Chapter 1064. Qin Yining told her how he met Sakurai in Danfu County, how he arranged for Sakurai to go to the field, how Sakurai rushed into the crowd to take her away, how he protected her to escape, and how he died for her in the end. He even told her how Sakurai was betrayed by philanthropist Wang and how philanthropist Wang ended up. Hearing Gao Dalai's narration, Hitaka's eyes gradually turned red. That person didn't betray his faith. He will always be a person worthy of my admiration. But I let him down because of my cowardice. When he was being wronged, I didn't even dare to stand up for him. Standing up, Hitaka knelt down and saluted Qin Yining. Thank you for trusting Shuming, thank you for not giving up on him. I can feel that although he died for you, he died in peace. His lifelong loyalty was not betrayed. You didn't let him down. He died for a good reason. Qin Yining hurriedly helped her up. After all, I'm sorry for him. You did your best for him. You were more courageous than me. Hitaka said with shame, compared to you who traveled across the ocean to find this place to bury Shuming, I just said a few words. It was so easy, but I didn't do it. I didn't clear Shuming's name, even if I killed myself, I wasn't qualified. After listening to Gao Dalai's explanation, Qin Yining comforted her, this is human nature. You don't have to worry about it until now. Since you and Sakurai are good friends, you should know his character. He's not a calculative person. Even if he was betrayed again and again, he didn't lose his faith in the end. He won't care about this. His spirit in heaven can see that you're still regretting this, and his heart can't be at ease. Hitaka was still ashamed. I know your identity must be not simple. But I don't want to know your details. I only care about Shuming. What are you going to do next? Seeing that she understood, Qin Yining immediately relaxed, so she didn't have to think about what he said. When I came ashore, I met a Dochi Manba. He had designs on me and my goods, so I went with the flow. He promised to help me promote the silk in front of the daimyo and the nobles. With his personality of showing off, he will definitely do his best. I plan to gradually find an opportunity to meet Ishikawa daimyo. When I have the opportunity to meet the daimyo, I will personally discuss the matter of Sakurai's burial with him. Hearing Gord's words, Ping Heping Cai shook her head and said, the chances of daimyo agreeing are very slim. Daimi acted arbitrarily and loved to save face. Back then, it was the daimyo himself who ordered Shuming to assassinate him. However, something went wrong in the middle. The other party actually had something on Shuming. Shuming was also the daimyo's most important person. Facing the other party's questioning, coupled with the alliance of several other countries, the daimyo was afraid. So, Adochi Totsuka gave the daimyo an idea and pushed Shuming out as a shield. Adochi Toshiba looks steady and polite, but is actually very vain and jealous. His so-called title as the #1 samurai was obtained through improper means. He can't even beat me, but is jealous of Shuming's skills and status in front of the daimyo. After defeating Shuming, he was like a fish in water in front of the daimyo, and his life was getting better and better. I was defeated by Shuming. All these years, I have always wanted to duel with Adochi. As long as I defeat Adochi, his title as the first samurai will disappear, and the people will not respect him as much as before. There is too little I can do for Shuming. I want to use this method to prove that Adochi Totsuka is not as good as Shuming. As long as his martial arts skills are proven to be fake, can it prove that the words he accused Shuming in the past are also false? Gord told Qin Yining Ping Heping Cai's idea. Qin Yining nodded and suddenly asked, in your Pingzi country, who is the most loved by the people? Who is the most capable of bringing a good life to the people? Is your daimyo truly wholeheartedly devoted to the people? If this was said in Daeju, it would be considered treason. If anyone heard it, they would definitely label him as a traitor. It was the same here. As soon as Gord Dalai's words fell, Ping Heping Cai's expression changed and she stood up. What do you mean? Qin Yining saw Ping Heping Cai become anxious and smiled faintly. I don't mean anything else. I am just concerned about the lives of the people. No matter who is the daimyo, as long as the people of the country can live a stable life, have land to grow, have food to eat, and peacefully reproduce, that is happiness. They don't need to live in fear every day, worrying about when war breaks out and they will lose everything. From what Adachi Totsuka said, your Ishikawa daimyo is very fond of grandiose achievements and likes to dominate. That is why he recruited all the men, including the boys under the age of 10, into the army. Many wars that should not have been fought were fought because of his bravery and ruthlessness. After a single war, every family lost their children. Is this the kind of life the people of Water Swamp Country want to live? Although Ping Heping Cai wanted to tell the truth and clear Sakurai Hideyoki's name, he was still Ishikawa daimyo's ninja. His loyalty to his master was a hurdle that he could not cross. Ping Heping Cai's expression darkened. What you said will not change my mind. I will not betray my master. Gord Delay translated these words, and everyone fell silent. This was another person who was as stubborn as Sakurai. It would not be easy to convince him to defect. Chin Ening smiled faintly. Then, isn't your choice to clear Sakurai's name a betrayal to Ishikawa daimyo? He racked his brains to come up with a good way to preserve his reputation. He exiled Sakurai to maintain his image, but you want to tell the truth to everyone? How much has Sakurai done for Ishikawa daimyo? He was once the #1 ninja of Water Swamp Country, an existence that was respected by the people. But Ishikawa daimyo framed him at a critical moment. Ishikawa daimyo's character, won't he be despised? If you want to tell the truth about Sakurai, Ishikawa daimyo's actions will be known at the same time. Isn't that betraying your master? Gord Delay listened to Chin Ening's words, and even his own translation into Japanese became tougher. Ping Heping Cai's expression turned serious, but the walls around his heart were faintly cracking. It was as if something was shattering in his heart. I will not betray my master, but you want to clear Sakurai's name. Doing so would be a betrayal of your great name. You can only choose one of the two. What Chin Ening and Pang Xiao had always wanted to do was to let the people of the world settle down and live a stable life, so that they would no longer have to suffer the ravages of war and be exploited by corrupt officials. That was why Chin Ening couldn't help but talk to Ping Hei Cai about the current state of Water Swamp Country. Ping Hei Cai's heart started to waver, but he also looked at Chin Ening with caution. Why are you telling me all this? Chin Ening said leisurely, I only have one goal, and that is to bury Sakurai in her hometown. If your Sichuan daimyo is willing to agree, then everything can be discussed. If not, I don't mind using force. You. Ping Hei Cai glared at him angrily. Chin Ening waved his hand, indicating for him to calm down. If I use force, I will definitely avenge Sakurai. That Sichuan Kusei and Adachi Manha are not people worthy of forgiveness. If they die, won't your country fall into chaos? I'm only saying this to analyze the current situation of Water Swamp Country from an outsider's perspective. I'm not a citizen of Water Swamp Country, so I don't need to worry about your future. I'm just saying this in passing. If you have the heart to prepare now, then you can use this chaos to give your people a better life. If you don't have the heart to protect your master, then when the time comes, I won't go easy on you. Everyone was stunned by Chin Ening's words. Gao Delay wiped away the sweat on his forehead, and explained everything to Ping Hei Cai. Ping Hei Cai's face turned red, and the veins on his forehead bulged. He gritted his teeth and said, Aren't you afraid that I'll tell the daimyo about this? You won't have a chance to do anything. Do as you wish. That is, if you want to betray Sakurai Hideyoki again. Chin Ening stood up with a smile. His eyes were burning, and his aura was imposing. I'll say it again. I just want to bury Sakurai and let him return to his roots. I want to end his regrets. I don't care about the price he has to pay for this. Whether or not you tell the daimyo about this, I won't change my mind. Ping Hei Cai gritted his teeth. He had never seen such a domineering woman. Her words were so frightening. His heart was struggling fiercely. Should he help Sakurai, or protect the daimyo? Should he protect his own beliefs, or should he think about the people of Water Swamp Country? Chin Ening looked at Ping Hei Cai's expression and slowly said, I've already explained my intentions. It's getting late, so please help yourself. When Gao Delay told Ping Hei Cai what she had said, Qin Yining nodded slightly, got up, and walked to the cabin. Ji Yun, Jing Zhe, and the others naturally followed Qin Yining out. The people hiding in the shadows also quietly retreated. Liao Zhibing and Gao Delai remained in place, not knowing what to do. Qin Yining's words today had quite the impact on them. They didn't expect the Alliance Master to make such a decision. But when they thought about it carefully, the Alliance Master was indeed someone who would do something like this. Gao Delai tried to persuade Ping He Cai. You don't have to rush to a decision. Think it over carefully. You've already regretted not speaking up for Sakurai for so many years. Think carefully before you make this decision. Otherwise, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Ping He Cai snapped out of his daze and nodded. He covered his face with the black cloth with a serious expression. After bidding farewell to Gao Delai and Liao Zhibing, he quietly left the junkyard. He didn't want to disturb the guards who were snoring on the shore. He quietly left the docks like a leopard cat. After Qin Yining confirmed that he had left, he returned to the main hall. Gao Delai said worriedly, Alliance Master, what if he goes back and tells on us? He won't, Qin Yining said confidently. Chapter 1066. Realization dawned on everyone. Princess Consort, you're the most observant. Liao Zhibing hesitated. I still don't understand the Alliance Master's intentions. The Alliance Master can choose not to tell him these things, and we'll just do what we need to do. That way, there won't be any risk of the secret being leaked. That's right. Meng Qin agreed. If the Alliance Master doesn't say these things, he naturally won't tell on us. We'll just bury Sakurai and go back. Who cares what happens in Water Swamp Country? Qin Yining calmly said, I can choose not to tell him. But I think that Sakurai doesn't want to see the people of this land become homeless. Besides, we're leaving. Who will be able to pay their respects to Sakurai in the future? If this place becomes a battlefield, the lives of the people will be lost. Even if Sakurai is buried here, it'll be nothing more than a lonely grave. If I don't say these things, I can. If I say these things, I'll just give Hiragana a chance to prepare. As for whether or not he'll prepare, and what kind of preparations he'll make, it has nothing to do with us. Everyone fell silent. They could tell that Qin Yining wanted the people to live a peaceful life. She didn't want the people of Water Swamp Country to suffer because of Sakurai's burial. But if Ishikawa Daimyo really didn't allow it, they couldn't come here in vain. That was why she'd convinced Hiragana to find a daimyo who could help the people of Water Swamp Country. In the end, the princess consort had a soft heart. Ji Yun accompanied Qin Yining back to the cabin. Seeing her frown, she softly consoled her. Princess consort, don't worry. Don't worry about this matter. Perhaps Ishikawa Daimyo will agree to your request. Qin Yining took off her outer robe and sat on the edge of the wooden bed with her long hair spread out. The orange light shone on her face, revealing all her worries. For the sake of dignity, he definitely won't agree to my request. If he agrees to bury Sakurai, wouldn't that be admitting to his past mistakes? If someone doesn't let go of what happened back then and continues to investigate, his actions will definitely be exposed in front of others. Ji Yun's slender fingers twirled her hair. Hearing this, she froze. Doesn't that mean we'll have to fight? Not necessarily. Perhaps there would be a turn for the better. In any case, I'll have to meet with Daimyo Ishikawa first before I can consider my next step. That will depend on the ability of that 10,000 leaves. Ji Yun felt disgusted when she thought of how Adachi Manha coveted Qin Yining. If it weren't for the fact that Wang Fei still needs him, I really wish I could dig out his eyeballs. A breeze blew in from outside the porthole, and the candlelight in the room swayed. Qin Yining narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, there's no hurry. The night passed peacefully. Gao Delai and Liao Zhibing went out to gather information. Even though Qin Yining said that Ping He Cai would not betray them, they were still worried. However, before they could find out if Hiragana betrayed them, the news that Ishikawa Daimyo was going to invite nobles to a banquet spread like wildfire. When the two of them saw that there were quite a number of vegetable farmers and fishermen delivering vegetables, fruits, fish, and prawns to the luxurious mansion on the short mountain, they hurriedly returned to the ship. At this time, Qin Yining was receiving 10,000 leaves in the front hall. Mr. Adachi said that your country's daimyo wants to see me? Yes. 10,000 leaves straightened his chest. There was a hint of pride in his smile, but he suppressed the corners of his mouth and pretended to be profound. I told the daimyo that a friend came from afar and brought the precious silk of the southern Yang country. The beautiful concubines and noble women around the daimyo will be very interested in this. It just so happens that the daimyo hasn't held a banquet for a long time. Under my strong recommendation, the daimyo also became a little interested in you. So he specially asked me to invite you. Qin Yining didn't need to think carefully to guess what 10,000 leaves said in front of Ishikawa daimyo. It was nothing more than a series of words to recommend a beauty. Just thinking about it made him feel disgusted. Her beautiful face burst into a smile, and she said shyly, "This is not appropriate. This little girl is an ordinary merchant. The daimyo's status is noble. How can I be qualified to meet the daimyo with my humble background? It's better to entrust the sale of the silk to Mr. Adachi. I can directly give you 40% of the profits. In fact, if it wasn't for the long journey and my husband's request, I can give you even more." Qin Yining's tone was nervous. Obviously, he was frightened. Any person of ordinary status would be nervous when they were about to meet a big shot. Seeing her like this, 10,000 leaves was even more convinced of her identity. The 40% profit was enough to move his heart, but what moved him even more was the opportunity to be the guest of a beauty. "You don't have to be like this." 10,000 leaves smiled and patted Qin Yining's shoulder with his big hand. The touch of his hand made his heart ripple. "I'm here, you don't have to be afraid. Besides, in such a banquet, you can not only have fun, but also get to know more nobles and have more business opportunities. Are you afraid that you won't be able to understand the language? You don't have to be afraid. I'm here, aren't I?" Qin Yining used a lot of self-control to not slap this person's face. His hands clenched into fists in his sleeves, and he lowered his head shyly and retreated. "This is too much trouble, Mr. Adachi." "It's no trouble, no trouble. How can it be trouble for you?" Qin Yining looked up at 10,000 leaves Adachi. 10,000 leaves Adachi smiled elegantly. Qin Yining gritted his teeth and then smiled. "Since that's the case, I'll listen to Mr. Adachi." "That's right." 10,000 leaves Adachi smiled. "The banquet is in the afternoon. I'll pick you up then." He stood up and smiled. "You can prepare well and bring some of the silk you want to sell. It'll be good for the nobles to see." Qin Yining smiled. "Thank you very much." That smile was so sweet that it could dazzle people's eyes. 10,000 leaves Adachi's heart fluttered. He had already imagined many scenes in his mind when he succeeded and pressed the beauty under his body to do whatever he wanted. Qin Yining saw his expression and quietly sent him off the boat. When they were far away, Ji-Yun said worriedly, "Princess Consort, why don't we send a signal now and ask Mr. Xie and the others to come over?" "That's right, Princess Consort." Jingzhe also said, "This time, we're going to meet Mr. Ishikawa. It might be unpleasant. I'm afraid that when the time comes, they'll gang up on us and we'll be in danger." Qin Yining shook his head. "We'll send a signal, but they have to listen to my instructions. Also, even if the negotiation fails today, Mr. Ishikawa won't directly do anything to us." They didn't understand and looked at each other. Everyone's eyes were filled with confusion. Chapter 1067. Everyone was enlightened when they heard this. They couldn't help but admire Qin Yining's meticulous thinking and bold decision. "I was just thinking that Princess Consort's move was too risky. So this was her consideration." Ji-Yun frowned slightly. "But it's better to be safe than sorry." Qin Yining patted Ji-Yun's shoulder and comforted her. "Don't worry. After observation and questioning, I can conclude that Daimyo Ishikawa won't be calculative with a little girl like me. Even if he wants to make a move, he will only do it secretly. However, we won't give him the chance to do it secretly. Ji-yoon nodded gently in the end. Although the others were also worried, they believed in Qin Yining's judgment. Liao Zhibing took the opportunity to report the results of today's investigation to Qin Yining. So, Hiragana probably didn't spread this news. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. Don't worry. Hiragana didn't fly into a rage yesterday. He won't have any reaction in the future. Alliance Master, you've thought this through. I'm still worried that Hiragana will reveal our secret in front of Daimyo Ishikawa. She wasn't worried. In fact, it didn't matter even if Hiragana revealed the secret. In the face of absolute power, any conspiracy was not worth mentioning. Qin Yining instructed everyone in a low voice and arranged what everyone needed to do clearly. Then, he and Ji-yoon went back to their room to change and freshen up. Ji-yoon hid the software at her waist and chose 2 bottles of Bing Tang to wear on her body. Qin Yining saw that she was so serious and only smiled. He didn't stop her. After a simple lunch, Jingzhe quickly walked in and said, "Madam, Mr. Adachi is here." Qin Yining stood up and took a handkerchief to wipe his lips. After rinsing his mouth with tea, he touched up his rouge. Then, he brought Ji-yoon, Jingzhe, Xiao Shui, and Jie Oda out the door. Liao Zhibing and the others had already left the ship one after another and were quietly preparing to receive them. Adachi Totsuha changed into a black robe with wide sleeves. His hair was combed and his beard was trimmed. When he saw Qin Yining disembark with his maidservants and attendants, his gaze was fixed on the woman in the silver robe. Today, she had changed into a light-colored dress, but her makeup was still bright and beautiful. Her luxurious jewelry added a bit of grandeur. If she were to tell him that she was a fairy who had descended to the mortal world, he would believe her. Adachi Totsuya walked up to her. "You look beautiful today." Qin Yining was disgusted by his gaze, but he smiled faintly. "Mr. Adachi, you flatter me. Let's set off now, lest the great names and nobles wait for too long." Adachi Mitsuya nodded and waved his hand. Immediately, 2 people carried a small sedan chair over. The palanquins here were different from the palanquins Qin Yining took in the Great Zhou dynasty. The palanquins here were laid with chairs and mattresses. People had to kneel or sit cross-legged. The Great Zhou dynasty didn't set up benches for people to sit on, so the palanquins here looked like square boxes. Qin Yining did as the Romans did. He sat in the sedan chair and straightened his skirt. Ji-yoon, Jingzhe, and the others carried a few pieces of silk and followed on both sides of the sedan chair. Adachi Totsuha rode in front and led the way. He raised his chin proudly and accepted the greetings of the passers-by on both sides from time to time. Adachi Totsuya inadvertently looked back at Qin Yining's attendants. Ji-yoon, Jingzhe, and Xiao Shui were all clever. Jingzhe and Xiao Shui had been spies for many years and knew what to do at the right time. When they noticed Adachi Totsuya's gaze, the 3 of them immediately put on a look of admiration, as if they had finally curried favor with a powerful person and were going to live the rest of their lives in luxury. Jie Dalai's reaction was slow, but Ji-yoon and the others' reactions were enough to please Adachi Totsuya. It also made Adachi Totsuya completely dispel his suspicions about Qin Yining. It seemed that the other party was indeed an ordinary businessman and wasn't faking it. Water Ze country wasn't big to begin with. Walking to the gate of the Great Name's residence was like taking a stroll around Danfu County. At this time, the wooden gate was open on both sides. There were already many horses and sedan chairs gathered here. Qin Yining's ears were filled with a language she didn't understand, but she didn't panic at all. She sat upright in the sedan chair and waited for the crowd to lessen before going out. However, Adachi Totsuya didn't want to miss the opportunity to show off his abilities in front of Qin Yining. He got off the horse and threw the reins to the servant in front of the gate. Then, he personally led the sedan chair bearer forward. "I am Adachi Totsuya's esteemed guest. How can I fall behind others?" The surrounding people were surprised to hear Adachi Totsuya speak a language they didn't understand. Qin Yining's lips curled into a mocking smile. The moment the sedan curtain was lifted, he returned to his usual dignified self. "Madam Yao, we're here." "Thank you, sir." Chin Ening lowered his eyes and pretended to be shy. He just happened to avoid Adachi Totsuya's hand and lowered his head to get off the sedan chair. Ji Yoon and Jing Zhe immediately went to support Adachi Totsuya from the left and right. Adachi Totsuya glared at Ji Yoon and Jing Zhe's backs with dissatisfaction. However, when Chin Ening stood still and looked up, he smiled warmly. "Madam Yao, please come in." Chin Ening nodded slightly and followed Adachi Totsuya into the residence. At this time, many of the surrounding guests were looking at her curiously. Their eyes were filled with curiosity. Some people even gathered together and whispered, then covered their mouths and laughed softly. Chin Ening looked straight ahead and followed Adachi Totsuya around the spacious courtyard. They walked onto a long corridor with a wooden floor. The courtyard was filled with green bamboos, pine, and cypress trees. The deer chase made a crisp sound. The clear sound of flowing water was very elegant. The courtyard here was interesting in a different way. Chin Ening walked to the entrance of the main hall, surrounded by greenery. Adachi Totsuya raised his hand and gestured for her to wait. He then walked through the door. Ji Yoon took the opportunity to whisper, "The other guests have also brought their attendants. Jing Zhe and I will follow you in." Chin Ening nodded slightly. When he saw Adachi Totsuya coming out, Chin Ening's exquisitely made-up face broke into a smile. Adachi Totsuya's footsteps paused, and his heart skipped a beat. He strode forward and said gently, "Madam Yao, Daimyo invites you in." Chin Ening nodded and turned around. "The two of you bring the silk and follow me in." Adachi Totsuya's mind was focused on Chin Ening. He didn't have the time to see what kind of attendants Chin Ening had brought. Ji Yoon and Gao Delai took the tray and followed behind Chin Ening and Adachi Totsuya. Jing Zhe and Xiao Shui stayed in front of the door to provide support. Chin Ening's beautiful eyes swept across the main hall and took in the furnishings. The main hall was ventilated, and the floor was covered with thick straw mats. The guests were divided into 2 rows, and each of them had a square table in front of them. On the table were several exquisite dishes. In the middle of the main hall, a man dressed in a white robe with wide sleeves, bright red trousers, and an unknown tall hat was leaning lazily against a table. The man looked to be in the knowing destiny state. His eyes were sharp and fierce. Behind him knelt a youth with his hair tied up high. He held a long black sword in his hand. This should be Ishikawa Yusei. Chapter 1068. Midori Adachi knelt down and kowtowed. He said in Japanese, "Daimi, the merchant from Nanyang has arrived." Ishikawa Kusei raised his eyebrows and looked at Chin Ening. "Oh, is the silk she brought really that good?" "Yes. How would I dare to deceive Daimi?" Midori Adachi slapped his fan. "I don't think her silk is that good. Are you interested in her silky skin?" As soon as he said this, everyone laughed. Even the noble women covered their mouths and giggled. They looked at Chin Ening as if they were looking at a rare toy. Midori Adachi's heart rippled. He quickly said with a smile, "No, I really want to introduce silk to Daimi." He paused for a moment, then joked, "But I will know sooner or later whether or not her skin is like silk." His words caused everyone to roar with laughter. Gao Delai was very angry. He leaned over to Chin Ening's ear and whispered their conversation to Chin Ening. Chin Ening's hands clenched in her sleeves. She suddenly lost all her patience. Her purpose was to see Ishikawa Kusei. Now that she had seen him, Midori Adachi had lost his value. This perverted villain had impure motives from the beginning. Chin Ening had already reached her limit. She was here to do business, not to amuse these people. Midori Adachi saw that everyone was laughing. These people's expressions were too explicit. He was afraid of making the beauty uncomfortable. He turned back and said to Nanyang with a smile, "Sit next to me later. I will definitely recommend your silk to all the nobles." He thought he could get a grateful smile in exchange for the beauty's smile. Who knew that this gentle and shy woman would look at him with a completely unfamiliar gaze? Midori Adachi was stunned. Even if he knew that the other party didn't understand Japanese, he knew what he had said to the daimyo. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Mrs. Yao, you, Chin Yining smiled at Ishikawa Kusei. The other party immediately noticed the change in her gaze and aura. Brother Gao, repeat my words to him. I'll say one sentence and you'll translate it. Gao Delai was already gritting his teeth in anger. Now that he agreed with anger, his voice was even louder than usual. Sichuan Daimai, I am the daughter of a noble from Daeju. Today, Mr. Adochi recommended me to meet you. It is truly a blessing of 3 lifetimes. I wonder if Ishikawa still remembers Sakurai Hideoki? Adochi Manba's expression changed dramatically. He looked at Chin Yining in disbelief. What did you say? Aren't you the wife of a merchant? How are you a noble? Chin Yining raised her eyebrows and smiled. She had been with Pang Xiao for a long time, so naturally, she had learned some of his arrogance. At this moment, her aura was imposing, and she did not look like a merchant at all. There was no need for an explanation. He could see through her identity just by looking at her. Ishikawa leaned over and pointed at Adochi with his paper fan. Do you know who she is? Adochi Manba hurriedly knelt down. Daimai, this woman told me that she is a merchant. She is using me. At this point, if Adochi Manba still could not see that he was being used, then he was really stupid. Chin Yining ignored his murderous gaze and smiled. Since Ishikawa Daimai is not replying, could it be that you don't remember Sakurai Hideoki? Gao Delai repeated Chin Yining's words in Japanese. The entire hall was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Adochi Manba was covered in cold sweat. Ishikawa Daimai's veins were popping out on his forehead. Woman, where did you come from? Men, chase her out. As soon as his voice fell, the samurai on both sides rushed forward. Chin Yining did not move. Ishikawa Daimai is famous for his bravery. I didn't expect that you would be afraid of a woman saying a few words. The situation was urgent. Gao Delai did not wait for Chin Yining to finish speaking. He had already begun to translate, and his translation was accurate. Chin Yining said, Sakurai Hideoki had been loyal to Daimai for many years. In the end, he took the blame for Daimai and died in a foreign land. I am his good friend, so I should bring him back to his hometown. Last time, I arranged for my men to send him here, but Daimai chased them out and did not allow Sakurai to be buried in his hometown. So this time, I came personally to talk to Daimai. In front of so many nobles and samurai, if Daimai avoids Sakurai's matter, it will be hard to avoid suspicion. As soon as Chin Yining's voice fell, Gao Delai also finished speaking. Ishikawa Daimai's face was ashen. His sharp eyes were like knives cutting Chin Yining's face. But seeing this woman's luxurious clothes and imposing manner, he knew that she was a noble from Daeju. For a moment, he did not dare to directly make a move. But if he did not directly discuss Sakurai's matter, the nobles present would also stretch their necks to watch. Ishikawa Daimai scolded in a low voice, I don't know what you're talking about. If you're talking about Sakurai Hideoki, then he is a traitor to our water swamp country. He almost caused a war. If you want to bury him, then you have to make sure that his betrayal of water swamp country never happened. I will never allow him to be buried in water swamp country. As soon as Ishikawa Daimai finished speaking, the crowd around him responded in unison. The man berated Chin Yining in a language that Chin Yining did not understand. Hearing this, Chin Yining's heart was in turmoil. Without any evidence, she could not make everyone believe her words, so there was no need to argue. Thinking of this, Chin Yining sneered, I'll ask you one last time. Is Daimai Ishikawa really not allowing Sakurai to be buried? Absolutely not. Ishikawa Daimai stood up angrily. Everyone stood up with him and glared fiercely at Chin Yining. Ji Yun and Gao Delai, who were standing behind Chin Yining, tensed up. They were worried that they would pounce on them. Chapter 1069. As soon as Chin Yining finished speaking, Gao Delai translated her words into Japanese. The hall fell silent, and only the sound of Ishikawa Fusei's heavy breathing could be heard. No one said a word. They all looked at Ishikawa Fusei, waiting for his reaction. In Water Swamp Country, it was possible to refuse a duel, but if one refused, it would be seen as a sign of weakness. Not to mention the fact that the one making the request was a delicate woman. If the daimyo didn't even dare to accept a woman's challenge, he would be looked down upon. Hearing Chin Ining's taunt, Adachi Totsuka drew his sword in anger. You cunning woman! You deceived me, and now you're insulting the daimyo. I'll kill you. You told me that the people of Water Swamp Country would listen to you and help me sell silken goods. I promised you 40% of the profits, and you agreed to bring me to see the daimyo. It was a fair trade. Why are you calling me cunning now? Ishikawa Fusei looked at Adachi Totsuka suspiciously and angrily. Adachi Totsuka's heart skipped a beat. He knew how suspicious the daimyo was. In the past, he had told the daimyo how famous Sakurai Hideyoki was in the outside world and how he was respected. He also said that his ninjutsu was unparalleled, and that he could assassinate anyone if he wanted to. The daimyo had taken note of this and found a way to banish Sakurai. Now that this woman had said this in front of the daimyo, wouldn't the daimyo believe her immediately? Even if he didn't punish her immediately, the seed of suspicion had already been planted in the daimyo's heart. As expected, Ishikawa Fusei looked at Adachi Totsuka with anger and blame. He was already convinced of his betrayal. Chin Ining said, Ishikawa daimyo, if you don't even dare to accept this woman's challenge, you'll become the laughingstock of the world. As the daimyo of a country, do you really not have the courage to accept this challenge? Looking at the expressions of the nobles and samurai present, Ishikawa Fusei knew that he couldn't run away anymore. If he didn't even dare to accept this woman's challenge, where would he put his face in the future? Suppressing his anger, Ishikawa Fusei snorted. Fine. I accept your challenge. When I win, I will definitely kill you and hang your beautiful head on the flagpole. I will let everyone see what the consequences of going against the great name are. Kill. Kill. Everyone roared. It was as if he had already killed the person. Chin Ining was not afraid at all. After hearing Gao Dalai's explanation, he immediately said, Okay. Then I'll immediately go back and gather my men. We'll fight at the docks in the evening. I'll bring my men, and you bring your soldiers. Let's settle this once and for all. If you don't dare to come, then you are a coward. Ishikawa Fusheng thought back to his subordinate's report, saying that there were only a few dozen people on the ship. Chapter 1070. Water Swamp Country was embroiled in wars of varying sizes every year, and the people were used to dealing with them. It wasn't that they were used to war, but that their words carried little weight. The people in power didn't care about their feelings or opinions, and as time passed, they could only silently bear the consequences of war. They watched as their men lined up neatly and headed to the seaside. The women and children could only hide in their simple thatched huts and weep silently. In the evening, the sea seemed to be burning with orange-red flames that stretched to the horizon. Ishikawa Fusei led his 200 soldiers and lined up at the dock. Facing the setting sun, he looked at the dozens of people who were waiting for him on the deck and laughed loudly. If you're willing to kneel and beg for mercy, I promise to leave you a whole corpse. The samurai who came with him all laughed and rubbed their palms together. Their greedy eyes were fixed on the ship. They wanted all the goods and women on the ship. Chin Ining listened to Gao Dalai's explanation and laughed. He also said loudly, Ishikawa Fusei, if you're willing to reveal the truth of what happened back then, clear Sakurai's name, and kowtow in front of her grave, I'll spare your family's life. Gao Dalai immediately translated Chin Ining's words into Japanese and announced loudly. When Ishikawa Fusei heard Sakurai's name, he immediately became irritable and shouted, Sakurai, that traitor, I will never forgive him. Is that so? Traitor. You know very well who the real traitor is. Ishikawa Fusei's forehead twitched. He could see that the other party knew about what happened back then, and he also knew Japanese. He didn't want to give them a chance to speak. What happened back then could only be left to rot in history. Cut the crap. Since you want to fight, then let's fight. Ishikawa Fusei looked at the dozens of people lined up at the dock and said confidently. Chin Ening smiled. I hope Ishikawa Daimyo doesn't regret it. I gave you a chance, but you didn't want it. Ishikawa Fusei sneered. Just as he was about to speak, he seemed to see something strange on the surface of the sea. In the direction of the setting sun, from the point where the burning sunset and the sea met, a row of bulging sails was coming towards them. Moreover, it was already very close to them. The golden light of the setting sun and the light of the waves were very dazzling. All of them had to squint their eyes to look at people. When the ships were still far away, he did not look carefully at them at all. The soldiers began to get restless, and everyone saw the fleet that was rapidly approaching. 1 ship, 2 ships, in their panic, they couldn't even count the number of ships coming from the other side. They only felt that the ships were covering the sky and earth, like a net, quickly surrounding the pier. A green dot of light slowly rose from the largest ship. Immediately after, a red dot of light shot up into the sky from the ship on the shore, as if it was responding to that dot of light. Ishikawa Fusheng was dumbfounded. The soldiers under his command were even more timid as they clutched their spears tightly, their straw sandals uncontrollably stepping back. Chin Ening stood on the deck of the ship, the evening wind blowing against her brocade robe. The light color of her robe was dyed red by the setting sun. A few strands of her long hair danced in the wind. She chuckled softly and raised her left hand. Of the 20 or so ships that had already approached, hundreds of small boats were quickly lowered by ropes. The sound of splashing water and the shouts of soldiers could be heard. Thousands of people boarded the pier one after another. These were the guards of the prince's residence who had passed through Li Chitian after Pang Xiao had been assassinated by the people of Danfu County. But in reality, they had all been trained for a long time. After transporting the treasure, they had gathered at Golden Harbor. Taking advantage of the fire in Golden Harbor, Chin Ening had brought them onto the 30 ships. Pang Xiao had always been known for his ability to lead troops. The guards he had trained were led by Jinghu Wei. They quickly boarded the pier and lined up in formation in the blink of an eye. Coupled with their superior weapons and uniform armor, and strict discipline, they were 100 times more imposing than the water swamp country soldiers. Not to mention, there were only 1,000 of them against 200. The suppression of numbers was enough to make anyone despair. Ishikawa Fusheng felt a dull pain in his chest. Only then did he realize that he had been so nervous that he had forgotten to breathe. It must be fake, right? Was this a joke? Didn't they say that there were only a few dozen of them? Didn't they say that she was just a weak noble woman? How could such a weak girl have such a well-equipped and well-trained team? Such a powerful force was enough to dominate the entire Nihon continent. How could they fight this battle? The crushing advantage in numbers was enough to annihilate all of them. Ishikawa Fusheng's hands trembled. His subordinates' eyes were bloodshot as they gripped their swords tightly, ready to face the enemy. Everyone's blood was boiling, and they wanted nothing more than to pounce on the enemy and tear them apart. Compared to their previous worries, now that more than 20 ships had surrounded the harbor and more than 1,000 of their own soldiers had successfully boarded the pier, the excitement brought about by their overwhelming strength made their fighting spirit soar. They had won by momentum. The battle hadn't even begun yet, but they had already won half the battle. The people nearby heard the commotion and came out to take a look out of curiosity. They were stunned by the neat formation of troops on the pier. They had never seen so many people in their previous battles. The people ran around to spread the news. In their panic, some ran away with their children, while others stayed in the village to wait for their deaths. A large portion of the people gathered by the mountain road, looking at the beach in despair. Chin Ening ordered Gao Delai, "Tell them what I said loudly." "Yes." Gao Delai's voice was loud and clear. Chin Ening said, "Ishikawa Daimyo, I had no intention of landing on your land, but you hid the truth, slandered Sakurai Hideoki, refused to clear her name, and even refused to allow her ashes to be buried in her homeland. You're so sanctimonious, jealous, and cruel to your loyal subordinates. Your conduct will only bring disaster to water swamp country. Do you still deserve to be a daimyo? Gao Dalai's voice echoed on the beach, and all of the water swamp country people looked at each other. Ishikawa daimyo was covered in cold sweat, and his face flushed red. He straightened his neck and cursed, "Bastard. You're spouting nonsense. I don't want to waste words with you. I'll give you two options. First, you tell the truth and bury Sakurai. Then, you kowtow in front of Sakurai Hideyoki's grave and admit your mistakes. My army will only guard the beach. Once you do that, we'll leave immediately and won't interfere with water swamp country's affairs. Second, you stubbornly refuse to tell the truth and continue to slander Sakurai Hideyoki. My army will have no choice but to fight you and kill you. Then, I'll bury Sakurai." Chapter 1071. As soon as Gao Dalai spoke, the seaside fell silent. The commoners in the distance heaved a sigh of relief when they realized that the enemy wouldn't do anything to them. Some were still nervous in the face of the army, some were afraid that they wouldn't keep their word, and most were worried about their families in the army. They had already lost a lot of their families and homes because of the war. Now that they were facing a powerful enemy, they had no chance of winning at all. Ishikawa Fusei's subordinates knew this as well. As soon as they saw the foreign army, they became wary and unconvinced. On the other hand, they waited expectantly for Ishikawa Fusei's decision. Ishikawa Fusei sensed that everyone was sizing him up, and his face turned even redder. Did he want his reputation, or his life? But from the looks of it, even if he risked his life and fought, his reputation wouldn't be any better once all of his subordinates died. Once the enemy took over water swamp country, wouldn't they spread the news of what had happened all those years ago? It wasn't even a question of whether the commoners would believe him. The right to speak was always in the hands of the strong. Ishikawa Fusei thought that since he had already lost his life and his reputation, he might as well preserve his life and think about the future. But he had always been known for his bravery. If he were to admit defeat in front of others, it would be difficult for him to speak. Sweat dripped down from his head through the cracks in his armor, and the golden light of the setting sun was so blinding that he couldn't open his eyes. The 1,000+ soldiers still stood with their backs to the setting sun, completely silent. Ishikawa Fusei's heart suddenly turned cold. He even wondered in bewilderment, how did he end up where he was today? Was it because of what had happened to Sakurai Hideyoki? Chin Ining said, "Ishikawa daimyo, what is your decision?" Everyone's eyes focused on Ishikawa Fusei's face. Ishikawa Fusei's lips trembled, and he couldn't say a single word. Chin Ining raised his hand and made a gesture. "Ha!" The guards of the prince's mansion standing in great numbers on the dock immediately roared. Then, the 1,000+ guards all got into position and roared, "Ha!" This unified roar brought a great shock to the people of the water swamp nation, causing them to huddle together in fear. Among the 200 or so soldiers, some of the younger ones even fell to the ground on their butts. Body Sichuan Fusheng shuddered and almost fell off his horse. In his panic, he blurted out his choice. First option, I choose the first option." Gao Dalai translated Ishikawa Fusei's words to Chin Ining. Chin Ining smiled and said, "All right, then I will keep my promise. Please do the same. Tomorrow morning, I want you to bring your subordinates and family members to personally welcome Sakurai. I want you to gather all the citizens of Water Swamp Country and have at least one person from each family to attend Sakurai Hideyoki's funeral." She wanted him to kowtow to Sakurai and admit his guilt in front of the entire country. Sichuan Fusheng was enraged. "Don't push your luck," he growled. What answered him was another thunderous roar from the guards of the prince's mansion. Ishikawa Fusheng's mount was so frightened that it started to pace restlessly. It took him a great effort to stabilize himself. In the face of absolute power, he had no right to choose, much less reason. Sichuan Fusheng felt extremely embarrassed for a moment and only wanted to escape from this place. He didn't have time to think about it and turned his horse around. He didn't care if there was anyone in front of him and directly urged his horse to rush out in the direction of the mansion. It was as if there was a fierce ghost chasing after him. The samurai and nobles hurriedly urged their horses to give chase. Seeing that the daimyo and samurai had all fled, the 200 or so water swamp country soldiers lost all will to fight and scattered like birds and beasts. Chin Ening sneered. When he thought about how Sakurai had been banished by such a despicable person, he felt a pang of disappointment and regret. Alliance Master, it's so satisfying this time. Liao Zhibing and Gao Dalai laughed heartily. This kind of overt scheme, open saber and spear, and the feeling of using strength to crush the enemy was simply too exhilarating. At that moment, a small boat slowly approached the shore. Xu Weiji and Xie Yu walked onto the dock with the help of the guards. Chin Ening also disembarked from the boat. When he saw the two of them, he smiled. Sirs, your timing is just right. Sooner or later, the threat to Ishikawa Fushing will be halved. Thank you for your hard work. The princess consort's signal came just in time. Otherwise, it would have taken us some time to get here. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji smiled as they looked around. The two of them walked around a few times. It's been so long since we've had our feet on the ground. After getting off the boat, this old man feels like he's swaying. Chin Ening chuckled. I felt the same way when I got off the boat. Even now, I still feel like I'm floating. I think it'll take us some time to get used to it. Chin Ening turned around and instructed Ji Dashun and the others, tell the brothers to set up camp here and cook. It's rare that we have the chance to go ashore, so let's not stay on the boat. Did you leave a helmsman on the boat? We left a helmsman behind. Don't worry, princess consort. Xie Yu said, since the princess consort and Ishikawa Fushing said that they wouldn't disturb the commoners, then our troops shouldn't enter the city. I think so too. However, we should replenish the food and fresh water on the boat. We'll leave a small group of people to transport water and bring some people to buy rice and grain. That's good. Xu Weiji agreed. Wang Yi's military is strict and impartial. In the past, when he was fighting, he never disturbed the commoners. If we maintain this style, it'll be a good habit for our troops in the future. The princess consort said something very well just now. War is a matter between soldiers. It has nothing to do with commoners. Chin Ening smiled. This is what Wang Yi always says. I'm just influenced by him. Everyone couldn't help but laugh. After everything was arranged, Xu Weiji said, I wonder how Wang Yi is doing now. He followed your majesty back to the capital. I wonder if everything went smoothly. Chin Ening thought of Pang Xiao's beating, and the smile on his face faded. His life is probably not in danger. Your Majesty still has to keep Wang Yi alive to interrogate him about the whereabouts of the treasure. However, he'll definitely suffer. We had no choice but to go out to sea this time. Since it's for Sakurai's matter, isn't it also to avoid the limelight? Once everything is settled, we'll go back. Chin Ening didn't feel at ease leaving Pang Xiao alone in the capital. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji also nodded. Seeing Chin Ening's frown, they smiled and comforted, Princess consort, you don't have to worry too much. First of all, Wang Yi's ability to adapt to changes is extremely strong. He also has imperial bodyguards protecting him. It's enough for him to protect himself. Second of all, things might not be as bad as we think. Moreover, this trip went smoothly and we'll be going back soon. At that time, we'll deal with whatever comes our way. As long as we work together, there's nothing we can't solve. Chin Ening nodded in agreement. She also thought the same. Although the reasoning was simple, it was impossible for her not to worry about Pang Xiao. At this time, Pang Xiao, who was being worried about by Chin Ening, wasn't actually living as badly as she imagined. After Li Chitian returned to the capital, he listened to Pang Xiao's suggestion and set up camp outside the city. After the officials respectfully welcomed the emperor, he was completely tied down by government affairs for the next few days. He was busy dealing with the remnants of the Lu family and had to deal with the famine after the flood. He was also in a hurry to find the treasure. He was so anxious that he couldn't tell what day it was. As a result, Li Chitian naturally didn't have time to deal with Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao returned to the residence bestowed by the emperor. Originally, there was a large family, but now he was the only one at home. Naturally, His heart felt empty. Fortunately, he knew that Qin Yining would return soon and that the entire family would be living peacefully in Shiyu. His heart felt slightly better. In addition, Ji Ziyu often secretly came to see him. The two exchanged information and advice on the court. Chapter 1072. Pang Xiao naturally wouldn't look down on women. Sister Yi was a woman, Qiu Feishan was a woman, Cao Yuqing was a woman, and Sister Yi's grandmother, who was the previous leader of the Qingtian alliance, was also a woman. Even Tian Jizi was a woman. If women really used wisdom, they wouldn't lose to men. Because they were very careful and sensitive, many things they did were very unexpected. Although the harem didn't interfere in politics, they were all Li Chitian's family members. What they said in private was a secret to outsiders, but to them, it was just a family matter. Outsiders didn't know about Qin Yining, but Pang Xiao knew that Qin Yining had most likely arrived in Japan at this time, and might have already met with the local famous people. Sister Yi had the treasure in her hands, and more than 1,000 of his subordinates, so her safety shouldn't be a problem, right? It was just that the situation on the sea was changing rapidly, and he was really worried. In short, if someone wasn't under his eyes, he couldn't be at ease. Pang Xiao picked up the wine bowl, raised his head, and drank a big mouthful. Ji Ziyu had always known about Pang Xiao's deep feelings for Qin Yining, and also expected that he would have such a reaction, so he advised, don't drink alone. Since you're worried about her, arrange more people to help her. After thinking for a while, he said, she's a woman, but she followed you through life and death, and ruined her family. She's also done her best for you. You have to treat her well too. If there's any danger, it's also good to arrange for her to leave early. Pang Xiao smiled when he heard this. He nodded and said, you're right. I'll pay attention to these. But looking at the current situation, I'm safe for the time being. Your Majesty also doesn't have the heart to worry about me. He said this to him with complete trust, and Ji Ziyu was inexplicably moved. Although he had been running to Pang Xiao's place these days, in fact, when Pang Xiao had just returned, he had hesitated. He was worried that Pang Xiao would suspect him. After all, he had always been in the capital and had many opportunities to interact with the emperor. Although his power was also weakened and he could not use it, his situation was much better than Pang Xiao's. If he were in Pang Xiao's shoes, it would be hard to guarantee that he would not be suspicious of him. But in the past few days, Pang Xiao still trusted him as much as before, and they still talked about everything. Ji Ziyu looked cold, but deep down, he valued friendship. Pang Xiao treated him so sincerely, so he would only repay her 1,000 times over. If you need anything, you can look for me at any time. Ji Ziyu smiled sincerely. I also have some people outside. Pang Xiao could not help but be moved when he heard this. He patted his shoulder with his big hand. Of course, I won't be polite with you. Ji Ziyu said, also, you have to be careful. If your subordinates are familiar faces, you have to try your best to avoid them. If your Majesty's people notice your people, then secretly protecting them will be meaningless. At that time, it will be equivalent to openly opposing your Majesty. It won't do you any good to fall out with him. You're right. I'll be more careful. Pang Xiao felt a little guilty. After all, he could not tell Ji Ziyu about the things that happened at home. Ji Ziyu treated him sincerely, but he had to keep a secret. He felt very guilty. But after all, it involved the lives of the whole family. It was not that he did not trust Ji Ziyu, but it was just a precaution. So he could only wait for everything to be over before he came to apologize to him. Pang Xiao sighed and poured wine for the two of them. The two of them ate another bowl. The two of them acted as usual. Ji Ziyu left after a long time. After Ji Ziyu left, Pang Xiao instructed Tang Xiu, pay close attention to the situation outside. Once Wang Fei appears, immediately send someone to secretly receive her. Tell Wang Fei that your Majesty has arranged spies. Tang Xiu nodded and said with a serious expression, Wang Yi, your Majesty arranged spies to search for Wang Fei. Could it be that he has the intention to kill her? It's hard to say. Pang Xiao's phoenix eyes narrowed slightly, and the corner of his mouth raised in a mocking smile. If he makes a move on a woman, then your majesty will really lose all his character. Tang Xiu said, Your majesty might just want to capture Wang Fei to keep you in check. Of course, under normal circumstances, your majesty would not want to kill Sister Yi. But nothing is absolute. If there really is a sudden change that causes your majesty to have the intention to kill, that is also uncontrollable. So you must not let your majesty capture her. Tang Xiu saw that Pang Xiao's brows were furrowed so tightly that it could squash a fly. He consoled, Wang Yi, don't worry. Wang Fei is resourceful. She has Sir Xie and Sir Shu by her side. She might encounter your majesty's spies. Before the other party can make a move, the other party will be captured. Speaking of this, Tang Xiu remembered Qin Yining's past actions. He couldn't help but laugh. Those people who thought they were strong and looked down on Wang Fei, didn't they all suffer losses? Wang Fei is really a heroine. Even the people by Wang Fei's side are different. Pang Xiao was amused by Tang Xiu's silly look. He glanced at him and said, You miss that girl Ji Yun, don't you? Tang Xiu's face heated up, but he said generously, I miss her. Doesn't Wang Yi miss Wang Fei as well? Wang Fei has long been Wang Yi's person. You still miss her? Ji Yun won't agree to me. Wang Fei has so many outstanding talents by her side. If Ji Yun takes a fancy to someone else, where will I go to cry? Pang Xiao was amused and laughed out loud. He patted Tang Xiu with his big hand and said, Don't worry. Chapter 1073. Ji Yun, Jing Zhe, and the others followed behind Qin Yining to the front hall. At this time, the doors on all four sides had been pushed open, and the morning light gently sprinkled on the emerald green brocade chairs. The wooden walls seemed to reflect a lustrous luster, and the utensils and furnishings were all chosen to be the most exquisite and gorgeous. As soon as they stepped in, they felt that the entire room was filled with radiance. Qin Yining turned around and asked Ji Yun, Did you arrange this? Yes, when we went to the daimyo's residence, we thought it was an imperial palace. In the end, when we took a look, it clearly looked like a big country gentleman's residence. That daimyo Ishikawa also has the nerve to think that he's a big shot. Let him come today, and we'll first take down his prestige, so that he won't be arrogant and complacent and still put on airs in front of you. Jingzhe laughed when he heard this. Aren't you afraid that he'll have other thoughts? What's there to be afraid of? There are more than 1,000 people outside, how could he dare to have other thoughts? Even if he has the guts, he doesn't have the ability to do so. Ji Yun's smile was somewhat smug. Qin Yining smiled, but his mood was not as relaxed as everyone else's. He always felt that after burying Sakurai, she would have to leave this land. Although this was Sakurai's hometown, they were in different parts of the world, and it would be difficult for them to meet again. Sakurai was long gone. But at this moment, Qin Yining truly felt that they were already separated forever. People's encounters with each other were very strange. Some people were like strangers even after knowing each other for many years. Some people were disgusted when they first met and didn't understand each other, while some people felt affinity when they first met. When she first met Sakurai, although Sakurai looked disheveled and dirty, she wasn't annoying. After interacting with her for a while, she felt that she had a unique personality. If she had known that he would lose his life for her when they first met, perhaps she wouldn't have sent him to the village to settle down. She would have kept him by her side and treated him well. At least he would have understood the situation, and wouldn't have immediately fallen into a group battle. Qin Yining's heart was filled with regret. She should have known earlier. It didn't take long for a group of people to arrive on the deck. The morning sun was slowly rising, dyeing the ship docked at the pier and the 29 warships nearby with a layer of golden light. Hundreds of people had already gathered on the beach in front of the pier, led by Ishikawa Fusheng. He was dressed in a black robe with wide sleeves and a cross collar. Compared to the first time they met, his attire was extremely low-key. Behind him were his warriors and soldiers, as well as the citizens of the Waterpool Nation who had come spontaneously. Chin Ening stood on the deck, looked at the people in front of him, and whispered a few words to Gord. Gao Delai nodded and quickly got off the boat. He walked to Sichuan Ji Sheng and said, Sichuan Ji Sheng, please come with me to bring out the memorial tablet. Ishikawa Kusei's expression changed. He was extremely unwilling to invite Sakurai's memorial tablet in front of his subordinates and the people. He couldn't help but roar angrily. I've already agreed to bury Sakurai Hideoki. What else do you plan to do? Have your people bring down the memorial tablet and the ashes. We'll bury them together and be done with it. Where did all these rules come from? Gao Delai's expression darkened when he heard this. He then sneered and said in Nihon language, behave yourself. Since you've already agreed to bury Sakurai, then you should do it well. If you keep hemming and hawing here, won't you still have to listen to our master's orders in the end? You. Ishikawa Kusei reached out to grab the hilt of his sword and was about to draw it. As soon as he made a move, the elite tiger guards behind Gao Delai all got ready, causing Gao Delai's body to tremble, and he stopped moving. Chin Ening didn't understand what Ishikawa Kusei was saying, but he couldn't help but get impatient when he heard them arguing in Nihon language for a long time and still refusing to bring out the memorial tablet. He got off the boat and asked with a frown, what's wrong? Gao Delai immediately told Chin Ening about Ishikawa Kusei's awkwardness. Chin Ening sneered, did I give you a third option yesterday? When Gao Delai heard Chin Ening's domineering words, even his own blood started to boil. He forcefully translated it to Ishikawa Kusei. Ishikawa Kusei's face instantly turned red. He gritted his teeth and glared at Chin Ening. He said in Nihon language, woman, don't go too far. Chin Ening didn't take it to heart. You haven't seen anything worse. Do you want to see it? As Chin Ening said this, he casually stepped aside, revealing the soldiers and warships behind him to Ishikawa Kusei. Ishikawa Kusei looked at these people, and the anger in his heart gradually turned into helplessness and submission. He understood this point more than ever before. In the face of absolute power, there was no room for negotiation. He could only follow orders. Ishikawa Kusei didn't say anything. Chin Ening said, all right, before you bring out Sakurai's memorial tablet and ashes, please tell the people what you did to Sakurai back then. Don't try to play any tricks. You have to tell them everything clearly. Ishikawa Kusei felt like he had suffered the greatest humiliation in his life, but he didn't dare to disobey. If he dared to say no now, all his previous subservience would have been for nothing. He still had to preserve his life. As long as he was alive, as long as these people left, he would still have a chance to turn things around. Chin Ening asked Gao Delai, who said, since you want the memorial tablet, Ishikawa Daimyo, please do it according to the rules. First, kowtow to Sakurai and light incense. Ishikawa Kusei felt like he couldn't kneel down. However, just as he was about to find an excuse, Gao Delai kicked Ishikawa Kusei's calf. There was a loud thud on the wooden floor, and the people around couldn't help but feel pain for him. I advise Daimyo to be more straightforward. Chin Ening frowned. If you delay important matters, I might even want to lead my troops to water swamp country for a few more days. Ishikawa Kusei gritted his teeth so hard that they creaked. For a moment, he really wanted to disregard everything and just pull out his sword to kill this woman who had forced him into such a desperate situation. However, he still cowered in the end. Ishikawa Kusei helplessly kowtowed and quickly said a long string of words that Chin Ening couldn't understand. Gao Delai couldn't keep up with Ishikawa Kusei's speed, and could only tell Chin Ening the gist of it. It was nothing more than a few words of apology and repentance. Chin Ening sneered. He knew that Ishikawa Kusei didn't regret his actions at all, and he couldn't help but feel apologetic towards Sakurai. He had simply succumbed to her martial prowess and had no other choice. But so what? It didn't matter if he didn't regret it now. She had thousands of ways to make him regret his actions. Ishikawa Kusei was forced to say words of repentance, so he stood up and picked up the memorial tablet and ashes. The group left the ship and slowly walked up the beach under the watchful eyes of the citizens. They then stepped onto a small mountain path, heading straight for the burial site Ishikawa Kusei had chosen. Chin Yining walked behind Ishikawa Kusei's group, and there were more than 100 guards by his side. Even so, Ishikawa Kusei heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that the 1,000 or so soldiers stationed at the shore had no intention of leaving. Xiaoyu walked up to Gao Delai and whispered a few words to him. Gao Delai immediately said, "The citizens can be witnesses during the burial. It's better for Ishikawa daimyo's soldiers to stay at the shore." Chin Yining couldn't help but be impressed by Xiaoyu's meticulous actions. He turned around and smiled gratefully. Xiaoyu smiled. "We didn't bring any soldiers, so there's no need for Ishikawa daimyo to come along. You can just have your attendants to help you." Gao Delai said this to Ishikawa Kusei. Ishikawa Kusei wanted to object, but he knew that it was useless to say anything now. He could only send the 200 or so soldiers behind him back to the shore to wait. He only had a few samurai and attendants with him, as well as 100 or so citizens who had come to watch the show. Soon, the group of people arrived at a quiet place. Chin Yining and his group were about to proceed further when Jingzhe suddenly stopped in his tracks. He blocked Chin Yining with one hand and listened carefully to the surroundings. Chapter 1074. Before anyone could react, there was the sound of a wooden mechanism being activated. Chin Yining quickly dodged to the side, but Jingzhe was faster than her. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of her. Xiao Shui and the others followed closely behind. The 100 guards also reacted quickly. In the blink of an eye, they had surrounded everyone. With a wong sound, the rain of arrows whistled through the air. The guards immediately brandished their weapons to block the arrows. After the first wave of arrows, there was a buzzing sound within a breath. Hundreds of arrows came from all directions. The guards of the prince's mansion waved their swords to block them. The broken arrows fell to the ground with a pitter-patter. Ishikawa Kusei and his followers hid behind a tree. Seeing the enemy easily neutralize their ambush, their hearts were instantly drowned in despair. "It's over. What should I do now?" If they didn't attack, the journey to the cemetery would be smooth. Ishikawa Kusei could have just kowtowed and be done with it. At least he could have kept his life and had a chance to rise again in the future. But now their ambush had failed. How could the water swamp country's 200 people fight against the enemy's 1,000 people? And if he wanted to escape, where could he run to? Ishikawa Kusei didn't know what to do. Just as he was about to panic, he saw the samurai and ninja following him from the corner of his eye. In a flash of inspiration, he suddenly pushed the person away. "Bastard! How dare you do something behind my back? How do you want me to explain this to you?" The person he threw to the ground was the astonished Hiragana. He didn't think that the same thing would happen again in front of him. Hiragana's ninjutsu was outstanding. He was caught off guard. Now that he recovered from the shock, he rolled on the ground to avoid the blade. Half crouched on the ground, he looked back at Ishikawa Kusei. At this moment, Hiragana finally understood how Sakurai Hideyoki felt that day. No, maybe he didn't understand it completely. Because he knew how Sakurai Hideyoki was betrayed, he was more or less prepared. At least after a moment of shock, he had a feeling of "I knew it." But Sakurai Hideyoki was caught off guard and was ruthlessly stabbed. He finally understood why Sakurai Hideyoki gave up in the end and was willing to be a beggar for so many years. This feeling of being betrayed by his lord was really disappointing. What's more, Sakurai was truly loyal to Ishikawa Fusei. Chin Yining immediately asked Gao Delai, "What are they talking about?" Gao Delai didn't hear it clearly. He only heard the gist of it. It's probably because Ishikawa daimyo said that Hiragana betrayed him. Hiragana set up all the traps here. Chin Yining sneered. So that's how it is. He's using the same old trick again. When you encounter danger, you push your subordinates to take the blame. Xiaoyu said mockingly, "To have such a master, it's really Xiaoyu and the others couldn't help but think that the person they followed wouldn't be so despicable. Ping by Nao dodged again and again. Her body was as agile as a monkey, and her hand subconsciously gripped the hilt of her sword. Qin Yining hurriedly said, "Don't let him attack. Otherwise, the blame will really fall on him." Yes. Ji Dashun immediately led Jinghu Wei to surround Ishikawa Fusei. Ping by Nao was squeezed out of the battle. She let go of her sword and frowned as she looked in Ishikawa Fusei's direction. At this time, Qin Yining had already approached under the protection of the crowd. He did something like this. "Are you still going to cover for him?" Gao Delai translated this to Ping by Nao. Ping by Nao fell into deep thought. She rubbed the hilt of her sword with her thumb. Ji Dashun led everyone to Ishikawa Fusei and his subordinates and pressed them against Qin Yining's shoulders. The surrounding citizens waited for a long time but didn't see any movement. They circled around to take a look. Seeing the ground full of arrows and the chaotic battle, the citizens panicked and retreated. In the end, when they saw Ishikawa Fusei and his men being captured, the citizens wanted to leave. Ping by Nao suddenly shouted, "Why are you framing me? Don't tell me you want to use me as a shield, just like Sakurai." The sudden roar in a language they were familiar with immediately piqued the curiosity of the commoners. They could not help but stop and look into the forest. Ishikawa Fusei's face turned red. He gathered all his strength and shouted, "Bastard! You're lying. Sakurai took the blame for you back then. You didn't keep your promise today. On the surface, you promised to give Sakurai a grand funeral, but in the dark, you set up an ambush to ambush Sakurai's last master. This woman came all the way here just to give Sakurai a proper funeral. She didn't want him to have to live in a foreign land and bear the infamy. A woman from another country can be so righteous and keep her promise. As a daimyo, you use your subordinates as a shield time and time again. Who would dare to trust you when you do things like this?" Ping by Nao shouted in Japanese. In the quiet path and forest, the citizens heard her loud and clear. When they were at the beach, some of them didn't dare to get close, so Ishikawa Fusei's words weren't heard clearly. Now that they were close, everyone heard it loud and clear. Everyone couldn't help but whisper in each other's ears. Ishikawa Fusei's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. He raised his head and glared at Ping by Nao. "You're slandering me like this. Isn't that betrayal?" Gao Delai repeated Ishikawa Fusei's words to Qin Yining. Qin Yining laughed. "Can this person be any more shameless?" Xiaoyu smiled. "This is Water Swamp Country's internal affairs. It's not our place to interfere." "That's right," Qin Yining said. "I just want to give Sakurai a proper burial. I'm doing this for the sake of the citizens. I also hope that their daimyo will be someone who cares for the citizens, but it's not our place to interfere." Still, it's surprising that Ping by Nao would make such a decision. Shu Weiji shook her head. What the princess consort said that day had already moved him. But because of his beliefs and status, he was still hesitant. Now that he's the one that Ishikawa daimyo is pushing out, he'll come to his senses. Qin Yining told them everything that had happened when Shu Weiji and Xiaoyu weren't around, no matter how big or small. Xiaoyu also said, "Right now, let's take care of things here first. After all, we're in a foreign country. We still don't know how Wang Yi is doing." Qin Yining thought about what had happened in the capital, and his heart sank. He ordered the guards to depart with Ishikawa Fusei. Ishikawa Fusei's face was ashen. Under the escort of Qin Yining's guards and the gazes of the citizens of Water Swamp Country, they arrived at the chosen cemetery. By now, everything was ready. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.